Good morning, conference. It's lovely to be back at an online conference in person once again. And lovely also to be joined by several hundred members online as well. So whether you're in the hall or joining us online, a very warm welcome. And I know as we enjoy meeting again this weekend, that will be tinged with some sadness. Sadness at the thought of those we would have loved to have been seeing again in the bar, in Fringe meetings, in the hall, who have sadly passed away since we last met. But I know we will hold them dear in our memories, both this weekend and beyond. This conference is also our first since the last big round of internal elections, so I wanted to take the chance to say thank you. Thank you most sincerely for the privilege and occasional headache of being re-elected as our first non-parliamentarian party president, and I'll do my very best to live up to the trust that you have placed in me. It's fitting in many ways, therefore, that we should be meeting in York, because it's in York where I first joined the party. It's here in York where I first stood in election for the party. It's also here in York where I drew my first bar chart for the party. Millimetre perfect, of course. But I do confess the Liberal Democrats have had rather greater electoral success in York since I left. I'll let you draw whatever lessons you wish from that. But thinking back to when I was here in York in the 1990s, the politics then and the politics now are remarkably similar. A very long-running Conservative government destroying its economic credibility in a moment of crisis, mired in sleaze, beholden to rebellious backbenchers who clothe their extremism in the language of populism, and, we very much hope, a Conservative government in its last days in office. And we absolutely must play our part in making sure that final stage of the story is repeated, because that's vital for our country, for our public services, for our communities. We need a fair deal. A fair deal gets sewage off our beaches, patients off waiting lists, greenhouse gases out of the atmosphere. A fair deal that replaces the failed Tory Brexit deal and gets us back on the road to closer relations with the rest of Europe. To do that, we need to get more Liberal Democrat MPs elected. The more MPs we get elected, the greater our chance of that so important prize of electoral reform for the House of Commons. But also the more MPs we get elected, the stronger our party, because the greater our resources, the greater our media presence, the greater our parliamentary opportunities, and the greater our credibility. And that's why getting more Liberal Democrat MPs elected matters to help us grow and win all across the country. More MPs means we can be more successful both in the blue wall and outside the blue wall. And a big part of that broader success, of course, is electing more councillors. We need to be winning council seats this May and beyond, not just off the Tories, but off Labour, Greens and the Nationalists as well, as Fiona Bennett and her colleagues did so brilliantly last week, winning a council seat off the SNP in Edinburgh. Because winning more council seats gives us more political power to improve people's lives, more power to improve people's lives in the way that Councillor Keith Aspden has done so brilliantly here in York. A councillor for 2 decades, council leader for a decade, many achievements that I could mention for Keith and his team. But I guess given how much we like debating housing at this conference, should particularly single out the thousands of new affordable homes that Keith and his colleagues have managed to deliver, not just debating housing policy, but delivering more affordable housing for the residents of York. Now, Keith is standing down as council leader in May, so it's almost like we planned having a conference here in York perfectly just to thank and celebrate Keith's record. So it gives me enormous pleasure to hand over to welcome us to York to Keith Aspden.
Thank you, Mark, and we won't blame you for our electoral successes in the 1990s. But good morning to everybody and welcome back to York. It's so great to finally see Lib Dems from across the country join us in our beautiful city after a few years' break. And it's great to see friends, colleagues and fellow Lib Dems finally back in person. I'm not sure what the collective noun is for a large group of Liberal Democrats, though, but I'm sure you'll all come up with something over the weekend. I hope for most of you this will not be your first time in York, and you will know just how amazing our city is. But a special welcome to those of you who are first-time visitors. I hope that during the week, in between some debating, training, networking, or for some of you singing at Glee Club, you will take the chance to see what York has to offer. It's always tempting to go through a little bit of a history lesson as the leader of York Council, from the Romans to the Vikings to the railways and chocolate, with over 1 billion Kit Kats made here every year. You could walk the Roman walls, have a look around York Minster or Clifford's Tower, or why not visit one of our over 350 pubs, so one for every day of the year if you wish to come back. Or my personal recommendation, helping to deliver a few leaflets. I'm proud to say that over the last 4 years, we painted York solidly yellow at our last local elections, and since then we've had the pleasure to lead the local administration. In 7 weeks' time, however, we're working hard to get even more Lib Dem councillors elected. Leading a city is a challenging task at the best of times, but when those 4 years are disrupted by a worldwide pandemic, frequent flooding, historic inflation, a cost of living crisis, challenging council finances and an incompetent Tory government, it's safe to say that the task for local government is even greater. Despite these challenges, I'm extremely proud of the hard work and achievement of our Liberal Democrat councillors in York. We continue to be the champions of our communities, working all year round, fixing issues, standing up for residents' interests and investing in our communities. Working together, we've supported our communities during the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. And I'm now going to read you a list of achievements. I could have been here all morning if I had got my way on the list. But we've unlocked the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity of the 700 million York Central Regeneration Project, attracted a new government hub, expanded the Railway Museum, delivered hundreds of new homes in the last 4 years, many more over the whole term of our office, invested millions in local community priorities, expanded mental health services, built a fantastic new stadium, opened new libraries whilst other councils were closing them, restored our historic Guildhall in partnership with the University of York, created a new community woodland, planting 1 tree for every resident in York, over 200,000, electrified and safeguarded our local buses, and we're delivering a local plan for the first time in 60 years. I could easily go on. All of this despite a decade of underfunding and outdated and counterproductive Conservative policies. And it comes down to Liberal Democrats in local government to make real, tangible change happen for our communities. As Mark said, I'll be stepping down in the May local elections, but I'm very proud of the team here and that the Liberal Democrats continue to be the party of local government. I think we all know that. We know how hard every single Lib Dem councillor across the country works for their local communities and how important your support and work is to help teams like us in York. Last May, we were delighted to see our Yorkshire neighbours in Hull win and take control of the council. Now there's more of that yellow colour on the map in the north of England, but we need to do better. For too many years, I've been the only council leader on many calls, certainly in Yorkshire, sometimes in the north. We need even more councillors in May. As we know, they will be champions of their communities, and we need more Liberal Democrat councils to achieve for our villages, towns and cities. In a few minutes after this, we'll be launching our local election manifesto with Ed Davey that sets out our bold, progressive plan for York's future. So as I mentioned at the start, if you can help deliver a leaflet or two whilst you're here to spread that message, please do. I hope that you thoroughly enjoy your time at conference. Welcome to York.
Thank you very much, Keith. So, on behalf of Federal Conference Committee, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Spring Conference. I'm Cara Jenkinson. Just before we start the debate, I just wanted to remind members of our Code of Conduct in relation to debates. And whilst we very much encourage robust and passionate debate, we also expect our members to be sensitive to other people's feelings and the fact that they might hold and express different views to our own, and that we should respect that. So, we now move to agenda item F2. You can see that on page 65 of the agenda. And the committee has received a lot of questions to F2, so we will not be able to select all of them. So we now, I'd like to invite Nick DaCosta to move the report of the Federal Conference Committee. Nick.
Thank you very much, Cara, and Conference, welcome back to York. Similar to Mark, it's where I started my career as a Lib Dem, having joined in November 2001, and having campaigned for Keith in Heslington Ward when I was a student here at York. So I'm always glad to watch how well the York Lib Dems are doing. So conference is about to kick off. Hopefully all of you enjoyed yourself yesterday at the inspirational rally and enjoyed the conference quiz as well. We've had a load of questions answered, so I'm going to try and keep my remarks as short as possible. Just to remind members that voting for the emergency motions ballot has now opened, and the ballot box is in the corner over there, so please do make sure you vote before midday today. And the emergency motions ballot, the emergency motions slot is tomorrow morning. In addition to that, just a couple of updates. We've had around 1,500 people register for conference, including a nice increase on those joining us online. So welcome to our members, both in the auditorium, in the Barbican, and online. I want to touch on a couple of items that I'll be answering later on, but with regards to the online option, this is part of the work that the Federal Conference Committee is doing to explore options around hybrid conferences and see what a proof of concept could be. As Mark mentioned in his opening remarks, the FCC is a new one which was elected in November. Thank you very much for everyone who took part in the members' vote. I do want to say thank you to those people who did not restand or were not successful in rejoining the FCC. We really appreciate the work they've done on the FCC for the many years that they have been members, but also welcoming the new committee to the joys, what is, at least in my opinion, probably the best committee in the party, the Federal Conference Committee. What's really important is that we work together as a committee to deliver our conferences, because if we can't work together as members of a committee, conference wouldn't happen. But the more important people who make conference happen are the fantastic stewards you see around the venues. They're in their in their Lib Dem yellow polo shirts. Don't know where I got orange from. Please, if you need any assistance, please find them. They're more than delighted to help. I also want to say a massive thanks to the team, Susie, Wilma, Amy, and Pilar, our conference team, who make all of this happen. Half the conference team have never run an in-person conference before. They've run online conferences, so this is a new experience for all of them. And we can't do what we do without the amazing work that they do. I think I've gone off long enough. I'm going to hand over back to Cara.
Thank you very much, Nick. Right, well, we've actually received a motion to suspend standing orders. So that motion is in order. That motion is from Kevin Dawes. I'm going to tell you what we'll do, what the procedure for that is. I will shortly... I'm sorry, it is not Kevin Dawes, it is Ollie Craven, just to be clear, that's Ollie Craven. So I will read a statement of his reasons. I will then ask you whether or not you want to have a mini debate on the suspension of standing orders. And if you vote not to have them, we will then carry on with the debate as planned. If you do vote to have a mini debate, I will call one speaker on either side of the argument. So that will be Ollie and Nick on behalf of FCC. And so the proposer, Ollie and Nick, should stand by. So here is the statement of reasons. It's a request to suspend Standing Orders 3.1 and 3.2 to replace F15 constitutional amendment due to start at 17:30 with submitted motion entitled Employment Rights and the Right to Strike. It is vital that conference debates pressing issues, and recent strikes are the perfect example. Rather than wasting time on administrative bigotry, we should be debating real problems. The proposed replacement places us firmly in favour of stronger workers' rights and against this destructive government. Okay, so can I see all of those who would like to hear a mini debate? So if you could please raise your voting cards. Okay, and for those that don't want to hear that mini debate. Okay. I am going to actually ask for that to run again. It wasn't a clear view, I think. So could we please see all of those in favour of having the mini debate? Thank you. And all those against? Okay, we will have the mini debate. So could I now call on Ollie Craven, please, and ask Nick DaCosta to stand by. Ollie will have 2 minutes, please, for the lights. Thank you.
Good morning, conference. I think I might be beating my own record on earlier speech, for myself at least. And I stand in front of you today because I do not think this conference should be wasting time on pointless internal debates when we are actually facing some real pressing problems in this country that we've somehow decided we don't have time to debate. How this conference could not take a view on some of the largest and widest ranging strikes in decades, I do not know. And I hope you will agree with me that taking a firm stance in favour of these strikes and behind the striking workers is vital for us to build a fairer economy and also to ensure that we start fighting poverty at its source. I hope you will back the suspension of standing orders to replace this pointless administrative bigotry with something worth debating. Thank you, conference.
Thank you, Ollie. And I now call Nick, and after Nick's 2-minute intervention, we will move to a vote on whether to suspend standing orders.
To quote a former chair of the FCC and someone who chaired the last constitutional debate we had on the online conference, we have reached peak Lib Dem at the opening of conference. The Federal Conference Committee considered the motion that is currently on the suspension requisition to be put on the agenda. At the meeting we had in January, we considered this motion, including a number of motions submitted on industrial disputes. Unfortunately, this motion was not selected as other motions on the matter were selected instead. Unfortunately, as conference this time round is only essentially a day and a half, and there were essential items that the FCC has no discretion in not choosing, we were unable to choose the motion that was submitted because of time pressure. There was an appeal lodged. The appeal was considered by the FCC. There were emergency motions submitted as well, and unfortunately, the emergency motions did not meet the criteria for an emergency motion. However, I am aware that the movers of the motion under the requisition do have an amendment to one of the motions on a fairer society, which covers some aspects of this. Unfortunately, with the FCC, we do have limitations with time, and that means that many motions that are submitted, although they may be laudable and valid, there simply isn't time to select them. Just one example, I calculated yesterday, if we had time to answer all of the questions submitted to conference and allow rights of response, that would be, I think, about 8 hours, 3/4 just to respond to questions, which is something, obviously, we want to engage with our members, and that's very important, and we do wish we had more time at conference. We did consider about if we were able to add additional time to conference, but unfortunately, as you may see from my report, the running of conference has become significantly more expensive, which means that we were unfortunately unable to add extra time. So unfortunately, the FCC were not able to select this motion. Firstly, as we had other motions, we selected on trade union, on industrial dispute, but also then that motion fell due to lack of time. Therefore, I would encourage members not to vote for the suspension of standing orders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick. So we're now going to move to a vote on whether to suspend standing orders. That, if we're going to suspend, that does require a 2/3 majority. For those that are participating online, please go to the relevant My Voice page. And I now ask those in favour of suspending standing orders to please raise your voting cards. And to those of you that are against, okay, just wait for the online votes to come in as well. Okay, so the 2/3 majority to suspend standing orders has not been met. Therefore, we will be carrying on with the agenda as planned. So that has eaten up some of the time that we had allocated to this. So in fact, I am now going to move to the next, well, I'm going to move to the vote for the conference committee report. We did have a lot of questions, but unfortunately we haven't got time to take those, but I'll remind members that those will get written responses. So I'm now going to move to a vote on whether you accept the Federal Conference Committee report. So please raise your hands if you wish to accept the Federal Conference Committee report. Thank you very much. And for those who wish to reject the Conference Committee report, okay, so that is clearly carried. Thank you very much. We now move to the Federal Policy Committee report, and I ask Jeremy Hargreaves to move the report.
Isn't it wonderful to be back? I'm not talking about the suspension of standing orders, but isn't it wonderful to be all back together again? Merely many congratulations to Susie and the conference office staff and FCC for making those online conferences work. I admit I was sceptical, didn't think it could be done, but they did an amazing job. It's no criticism of them to say that I would be very happy if I never have to go to another online Liberal Democrat conference. Okay, the FPC report. I hope you've had the chance to read our written report. We have been focusing on three things over the last few months. Firstly, on making sure that as a committee, we have a clear theme, narrative, story, whatever you want to call it, that tells the story that underlies our policy approach, under which the narrative and story under which our many, many detailed policies hang and which they tell the story of in detail. This has been the main focus of our two meetings in February, including an all-day in-person away day. We will be bringing that to you as part of our pre-manifesto for this autumn conference. And also related to that, we are doing some work on a second stage now about some headline exemplar policies which will illustrate that in some very specific, concrete, high-profile ways. So that has been our main focus around around our committee's narrative and story, which underpins all our individual policies. Secondly, we have a very extensive programme of policy working groups, partly as a result of the cancellation of last autumn conference, so those ones haven't yet completed, and we're debating two of them this weekend. You'll see the details set out in the written report, and I'm not going to run through them. We have an ongoing programme of discussion with them about their work, and I want just to say how it is we approach doing that as a committee. We are guided by two principles. Firstly, trying to develop policy in areas and in ways which will help us politically and do useful political work for us, help us win seats and votes. And that's a clear principle in the way that we set up, we choose areas for groups, the way that we work with them, and we then approve final proposals to bring to you at a conference. And the second thing is things which tell the story of what we believe as Liberal Democrats, the things about why we're in politics, the things we want to change in the world, the things which, in a sense, whether they win votes or not, we want to talk about. So those are the two ways in which we choose policy areas and then to develop and then guide their work. And thirdly, it continues to be a big priority of FPC to try and engage as many members of the party as possible in policy making. I don't need to tell that to you because you're the people who've turned up at 9 o'clock on a Saturday morning to talk about it. But we want as many people as possible to be a part of that. I want to emphasise again the best way of doing that in many ways is to engage in the consultation exercise which all our working groups run. There's 3 of them running consultation groups or sessions this weekend which I encourage you to participate in, and also if you're not at the sessions or don't want to at the sessions to write in submissions. Please do that because that's the real time to influence policy working groups. By the time they come to conference their final debate, there might be 1 or 2 amendments discussed, but actually what's in the paper is not going to change very much. Lastly, we're about to start a significant project to try and make our existing body of policy more easily accessible to members. This is difficult to do, which is one of the reasons it hasn't been done, but it's probably the request we get more than anything else from party members, and we're about to start another big initiative to do that. Lastly, if you want to follow our work in more detail than just every 6 months, please do look at our Facebook page and join up there and follow the regular reports there, and you can also ask questions about our work, which we'll answer. It is facebook.com/groups/Federal Policy Committee. I hope you think that what we're doing is useful for the party, and if so, you'll vote through our report.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. So I'm going to take one question, and that is a question in relation to diversity on working groups. And if I could ask Lucy Tong to stand by in case there is a supplementary, if she could move to the intervention mic, which is over there, to the left of the auditorium on my side. So, Jeremy, if you'd like to answer that question.
Thank you. Lucy, you've asked how we can improve diversity on working groups. And I would say how we can make sure that any underrepresented groups on working groups can be less underrepresented is probably, well, not probably, it is definitely the main focus of pretty every discussion FPC has about composing working groups. So it is a huge area of interest, and I'll say a bit about what we do and can do about that. I do just want to say about composing working groups, we do now get a lot of applicants for working groups. We might get somewhere between 50 and 150, sometimes more, applicants for each working group, which is absolutely fantastic. The range of expertise, as someone who reads all the applications, is just amazing there. It does mean that sometimes as many as 9 in 10 applicants will not make it onto working groups if they're to be a manageable size. And the way we approach about selecting people is all about balances. It's about balancing the different points of view on whatever topic it is on discussion, around balancing different perspectives, different areas of expertise, around balancing demographic issues like age, race, gender, geography, and it is all about making sure we balance all those balances. Okay, in terms of diversity, we have taken a big step forward, forced on us, in the fact that all our meetings are now, working group meetings are now online through Zoom. They might have a very occasional in-person meeting, perhaps one in the entire course of a working group. They're basically all online. And that's hugely important for geographical diversity and other people who are not, for whatever reason, happy or willing, keen to come to Westminster on a weekday evening. So that's been a huge step forward. One of our challenges is finding people who we can make sure, applicants, candidates, who we can then appoint. We do advertise working groups wherever we can. We specifically contact all the diversity AOs and interest groups in the party and encourage them to encourage their members and others to apply. And in sometimes we do make take specific steps on key demographics where we think underrepresented to approach individuals to apply. But we're keen to generally follow a process rather than to go out and just find people. We as a committee would really welcome help from anybody in the party in encouraging people to put themselves forward for working groups. Please do follow the advertisements. Do contact us. If you want to know what we're doing, reading our reports for these conferences or on the Facebook page I talked about is a good way of doing that. We don't do things, upside and down, so we don't things do in a great hurry, so things we do generally know are coming up. And please talk to us about what we're doing and ask how you can help us to get people to apply. But we're keen to reach as many people as we can in the party to apply. And as I say, diversity in all its many senses on working groups is a really high priority for FPC.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. So I can't see Lucy by the intervention mic, so we are now going to move to a vote on whether to accept the Federal Policy Committee report or not. For those online, you should be seeing the vote on My Voice now or very shortly. Do refresh your page if you're not seeing that. And now for those in the hall, if you would like to accept the FPC report, please raise your voting cards now. Thank you very much. And for those that wish to reject that report, please raise your hands now. Okay, we'll just wait for the online vote to come in. Okay, that is clearly carried both in the hall and online. We now move to the next agenda item, which is the report of the Federal International Relations Committee. So if I could ask David Chalmers, please, to come down and to move the report. Thank you.
Good morning, conference, and welcome. This is my first sort of address to you as the new chair of the Federal International Relations Committee after the election in January. And I would just like to take a moment to thank all those members who stood down after their work of the previous 3 years, and all those new members of the committee going forward. As you'll see, hopefully you've read the report, and you'll see some of the work that we've been doing. And I'd just like to touch on a couple of the questions that actually came in relating to some of the work that we have been doing. As many of you know, I myself got into politics through my work on the Kaleidoscope Trust and work with LGBT plus rights. And I had a mandate and stood 3 years ago that I wanted to make sure that that was actually central to our work, international work with our sister parties. And I'm really proud of the work that we've managed to do over the past 3 years, and I hope that we're going to be able to continue to do that. Last year in Dublin, along with 38 member sister parties from ALDI, we signed the Dublin Declaration declaring our support for LGBT plus rights, but also to ensure an awful lot more. And that was part of the Rainbow Platform programme, which we, the Lib Dems, have been a part of creating a training programme for our sister parties across Europe on how to recruit, support, and look after candidates and LGBT plus members. We also, when new parties like Servant of the People and the Ukrainian sister party wanted to join ALDE, it was our party that asked them what was their position on LGBT plus rights. And when we received a positive response that they wanted to actually work with us and learn from us, that we were able to support their being brought into the ALDE family. We've also been doing the same on Liberal International, and my colleague Adrian Haluanainen-Tret was elected earlier last year to the Human Rights Committee, and I know that he is also doing very much on the same thing with many of our sister parties around the world. I would like to say, as I said, this is part of our work. There's an awful lot more that we're doing. And when I was asked about one of the questions, what we're doing to actually make sure that our values are promoted within our sister parties, we've been leading on this issue. We have brought motions to ALDE Congress and Liberal International promoting on one point in Bratislava last year, we were the ones who led a motion looking at how sporting bodies should look much more at how the country that is going to host those events should actually deal with human rights across the board. We also brought in a motion following the dreadful murder of two young gay people outside a bar in Bratislava that looked at hate crime and how countries across Europe could actually look to combat that. So from our work, we've been doing a lot in this area, and we'll be carrying that forward. I shall be leading our delegations to Liberal International in Ottawa in May, at the beginning of May, and also to the ALDE Congress in Stockholm at the end of May. And I said our delegations will reflect the diversity of our society and our party and our community. And as I said, I will be very much leading on many issues very central to the party's commitments and its values. And I would like to close there and ask if you would support our report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. So I'm not going to be taking any questions, although we did receive some, partly because David has answered them already and partly because we're running behind time. So we will now move to a vote. Again, those online, please go to the My Voice page. And could I see all of those in favour of accepting the report? Voting cards up, thank you. And all of those against? Thank you. And we'll just give it a few moments for the online votes to come in. Okay, so that is clearly carried. The report is accepted. So we now move to the next agenda item, and that is F3, which is the Federal International Relations Committee representation. And I will now ask David to come back to move that motion. Thank you.
Good morning, back again. So, this business motion reaffirms our partners' commitment to and continuing membership of Liberal International and ALDE, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats across Europe, and its successor organisations. Both bodies are important forums for enabling Liberal Democrats to engage with our sister parties across the globe, to influence debate, promote our liberal values, and manifest the internationalism that sits at our party's core. It is proposed here that the chair of the Federal International Relations Committee, FIRC, continues, as always, to lead the Lib Dem delegation to the ALDE Council. The FIRC chair coordinates the preparatory work undertaken by FIRC, tabling resolutions, tabling amendments to the resolutions of other delegations, determining voting lists, and deciding who will speak for the delegation in each debate, for both ALDE and LI meetings and conferences, a process taking several weeks running up to the events. On occasion, the whole task has been delegated to the vice chair, where the chair has been unable to travel. It is important the person who has coordinated the whole process is the delegation leader, i.e. the chair. Currently, the ALDE delegation is 100% elected by the party membership of the federal elections. The change proposed is that the FIRC chair is automatically a member of the delegation, with the remainder being elected as they are now, and for the reasons stated above. The Constitution gives responsibility for managing our relations with LI and ALDE to FIRC, hence the reasoning for the chair of FIRC to be automatically a delegate. The Federal Board have been consulted throughout and are happy with these changes. There is an additional argument for the change. Currently, FIRC elects its chair from amongst its directly elected members. Because of the need for the chair to lead the ALDE delegation, FIRC and IRC before it have always chosen as chair someone who has succeeded in being elected to both FIRC and ALDE council delegations. The size of the ALDE delegation also fluctuates. It is not a fixed number. Hence, FIRC is effectively constrained in its choice of chair to someone who has been elected to the top 5 or 6 places in the ALDE council delegation. It is felt that it would be much better if FIRC could simply elect its chair on merit rather than having to take logistics into account. As was pointed out earlier, the rest of the ALDE delegation, whose number fluctuates, will be elected by all party members in the federal elections. Runners-up will act as reserves. This is an important point. The need for substitutes was recognised when at the ALDE Congress last year in Dublin, we appeared to be under strength, following withdrawals due to illness. A few years previously, the delegation organisers would have had the contact details of runners-up, and it was common practice to call on them if required. The unavailability of delegates to travel for reasons involving work, health or family is an occupational hazard. Without the full complement, we may not be able to cast all our votes. The process outlined returns us to the previous convention. A similar situation has been proposed for delegations to the Liberal International Executive Committee, i.e. the delegation be led by the chair of FIRC or a deputy drawn from the directly elected members of FIRC, and that any additional delegates are agreed by the voting members of FIRC. Previously to the setting up of the Federal Board, the IRC was a subcommittee of the Federal Executive. When we became a full Federal Committee, i.e. FIRC, the power to select 2 delegates to Liberal International Executive were transferred to the Board. However, it has become clear that this power should have been transferred to FIRC as the committee with a constitutional responsibility to manage the delegation. I should like to point out again that the Board was consulted on the text of this motion prior to the federal elections, as this motion was scheduled for last autumn and agreed to this change. This motion confirms the role of the chair of FIRC to lead our delegations to outside international bodies, ALDE and Liberal International, and the methods for choosing additional delegates. It will ensure our engagement with these bodies, that our delegations are representative of the diversity of our party and representative of its values, and therefore I urge you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. As we've had no valid speakers' cards against the motion, we're going to move straight to the vote on this one. So please, if you support this motion, raise your voting cards now. And again, online voters, you should see that coming up on My Voice. Thank you very much. And please, if you are against the motion, raise your cards now. Thank you. So as before, we'll wait a few moments for the online votes. Okay, so that is clearly carried. We now move to motion F4, which you'll find on page 67 of the agenda, and that's constitutional, housekeeping and international work. And I now ask Jeremy Hargreaves to move the motion.
Conference, I feel my whole life has been leading up to this moment. When I joined the party 33 years ago, if I wasn't dreaming of standing before you proposing some constitutional tidying up, I obviously should have been. Okay, that's enough sarcasm. The points in this motion, Conference, really are very routine, and they're mostly inevitable consequences of some changes elsewhere in the Constitution or the results of Britain's tragic departure from the European Union. In addition to the ones in the motion in the agenda and directory, you can see a further small point in the Conference Extra or Conference Daily, and the point there is to ensure that members of the Audit and Scrutiny Committee can continue. When the Audit and Scrutiny Committee was set up about 5 years ago, it was quite rightly put in that you should not be able to be on it if you have recently been on another party committee. On one reading, possibly in a certain light on a dark night, that could be interpreted as stopping you serving more than one term on the Audit and Scrutiny Committee at FASC itself. This is to clarify that that's not the case. In the main motion, the points are, firstly, ensuring that we don't create an unhelpful bottleneck in the in the appeals process of requiring every individual allocation of a case to be done personally by the chair of the appeals panel, rather than is much more normal by another member of the team under the authority of the chair, and this makes that clear. I will take a moment just to say that the appeals panel is really working very well now and much better than it has been in the past, and in particular is involving a much wider range of appeals panel members, which is fantastic. So that's the first one. Second one is following the consequences of other changes which move responsibility from some things away from the board to other more suitable committees. There are some consequential changes there. Thirdly, removing a place on FASC which has been unfilled and which everyone involved thinks is unnecessary and possibly even inappropriate from FASC. And lastly, adjusting the membership of FERC, about which we've just made other decisions, to reflect the fact that there are sadly currently no Lib Dem MEPs or Lib Dem members of the EU Committee of the Regions to appoint the members to it, which is specified in our constitution. Conference, can I firstly thank you for being here for this not immensely thrilling but important tidying up work here first thing on a Saturday morning, and hope that you will give your consent to these very small changes so that we can focus on the really much more important things we have to discuss through the rest of today and tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. And because we haven't had any cards against, I'm going to go straight to the vote again on this one. So could I see cards for those in support of the motion? Thank you. And could I now see all those against? Thank you. We'll just wait a few moments for the online votes to come in. Okay, so that motion is very clearly carried. So I would like to thank my aide, John Ball, and my hall aide, Alex Wagner. And I'm going to be handing over to Jenny Rigg for the next motion, F5, on dental issues. Thank you.
Good morning, Conference, and welcome to F5 Access to Dental Services, which you will find on page 72 of the agenda or in the relevant section of the app. There is one drafting amendment, which is on page 13 of Conference Extra or in Conference Daily, and one moved amendment, which is on page 14 of Conference Extra. I'd like to remind all speakers to keep to time, please. I now ask Piers Allen to stand by, and I would like to call Daisy Cooper, who is the MP for St Albans, to propose the motion.
Good morning, Conference. This is my first time speaking since I was elected as the MP for St Albans. How bonkers is that? Anyway, we're here to talk about dentistry. DIY dentistry on the rise. NHS dentistry at breaking point. People pulling out own teeth. These are just a few of the shocking headlines that we've seen in the past year. With NHS appointments scarce at best and in some places non-existent, people are being forced to spend hundreds, if not thousands of pounds on private dental care. And those who can't afford it are resorting to DIY dentistry. The scale of the crisis is truly alarming. Just last summer, the BBC investigated the state of NHS dentistry and found that a shocking 90% of surgeries had shut their doors to new NHS patients. They found that 8 in 10 NHS practices weren't even taking on children. The British Dental Association estimates that 3,000 dentists in England have moved away from NHS work entirely since March 2020, with many more significantly reducing their NHS commitment. The BDA has also warned that without significant government intervention, there could be an unprecedented collapse. Tooth decay is consistently the #1 reason for hospital admissions among young children. And children from the most deprived areas are already 3 times more likely to have hospital extractions than their peers. And the pain they experience disrupts their sleep, their eating, their nutrition, their ability to concentrate. It can affect their education and indeed their life chances. The government has run our NHS dental services into the ground. But they can't even claim that money is the issue. Last year, there was a 3-hour parliamentary debate where MPs of all parties, including Conservative MPs, told the Minister just how dire the situation was. In a rushed bid to try and work out what to do, she announced a £50 million emergency fund to dentists to create emergency catch-up appointments. But when I later challenged the government on how this money had been used, they were forced to admit initially that they had absolutely no idea. And then we later found out that 35 of that 50 million hadn't been spent at all. The system the government had created was so convoluted and badly thought through that dentists weren't even able to use that money. But it gets worse, because in this current financial year, there is a staggering underspend in the NHS dental budget of £400 million. That's enough money to create millions of free checkups for children, pregnant mothers, and the low-paid. And that's why I support the amendment to ring-fence this money and use it in the next financial year for an emergency dental programme. This underspend, when people are desperate for dental appointments, is an absolute scandal. And it is patients who are paying the price for the Conservatives' incompetence. What worries me most, however, is that the Conservatives won't even bring forward any plans to fix this mess, either now or even in the near future. And that's why I am proud to put forward the Liberal Democrat plan to transform NHS dental care today. We would start by overhauling the current NHS dental contract and bring forward serious reforms to ensure that everyone can get the dental care they need when they need it. The state of the current model means that many dentists are simply no longer taking on NHS patients at all and are turning solely to private practice instead. We would work with dentists to look at a pay-per-patient flexible commissioning to tackle innovation and having weighted funding to tackle the most deprived areas and to help those people who need it most. And those reforms, combined with increased funding, would aim to put an end to this mess. Those reforms would incentivise dentists to take on NHS patients and put an end to areas with no NHS dentists at all, known as dental deserts. We also urgently need to retain and train more dentists and make providing NHS services more attractive. Like the NHS, understaffing is leading to reduced services and long waiting times. So increasing the number of NHS dentists is critical to tackling long waiting times and the shortage of NHS dental appointments. We also know that children need healthy teeth and gums more than anyone to prevent poor health early on and ensure their teeth last a lifetime. And that's why this motion proposes to remove VAT on children's toothbrushes and toothpaste and to help educate children from a young age about how to look after their teeth. We also want an emergency scheme to ensure that children, pregnant women, young mothers and those on low incomes have access to their free checkups on time. At the moment, they are struggling to get an appointment and many simply cannot afford to go private. Our party believes that everyone should be able to access an NHS dentist if they need one. We will not stand for this two-tier system where those who can afford to pay get dental care and those who can't afford to pay go without. So, conference, that's why this motion is so important. Please support the motion and the amendment.
Thank you very much, Daisy. Can I ask Marie Goldman from Chelmsford and Malden to stand by? And I now ask Piers Allen from Twickenham and Richmond to propose the amendment.
Good morning, Conference. I very much welcome this motion and we're grateful to Daisy and Richard for highlighting the work of Healthwatch England in exposing the dire access to NHS dental services during the pandemic and now these many months later. Our own Healthwatch Richmond highlighted the problem in our borough to the extent that the Council Health Committee I chair called in the NHS England London Region Dental Commissioners to discuss the situation in relation to dentistry in Richmond in June 2021. It was acknowledged that NHS dentistry was operating at reduced capacity and to reduce targets. Initially, dentists had been asked to achieve 20% of their normal NHS work during the pandemic, with the target increased to 60% in April 2021. While urgent dental care hubs had been set up in London and across England, it was confirmed that access to the non-urgent NHS dental care and the backlog were severe problems. It was anticipated back then, but it would take around 2 to 3 years to get back to normal. Indeed, NHS England's submission to the Parliamentary Health and Social Care Commission just a few weeks ago included previously unpublished data that shows the true scale of NHS dentistry. The backlog of unmet demand that built up over the pandemic was an astounding 93.5 million units of dental activity, almost 110% of a full year of dental activity. It's therefore staggering to learn, as Daisy mentioned, that last month, based on FOI data obtained from the NHS Business Services Agency by the British Dental Association and information published by the Health Service Journal, that the National Dentistry Commissioners were reporting an underspend of 400 million, that's some 13% of the annual budget. And this money was being returned to NHSE for likely reallocation to other healthcare expenditure. The situation highlights just how unfit the national NHS dentistry contract is and how urgently government needs to act to fix this. But there is also the danger of repeated underfunding as commissioning of NHS dental care services moves from NHSE to sub-regional integrated care systems. While local commissioning may be able to focus on prevention, health inequality and better target local need and demand, particularly better access for particularly vulnerable groups. ICSs will need proper funding from NHSE and central government. The below-inflation increase in the public health grant announced earlier this week sadly shows that the government's commitment to putting prevention first and tackling oral public health is feeling very challenged on amalgam. So do please support the amendment and the motion as a whole, I thank the movers of the motion for accepting the amendment. It brings in some important additional hurdles that need to be addressed, but we do first need the government to actually fix the bridge work very, very urgently. Thank you.
Can I ask Lee Darg from Central Birmingham to stand by? And I now call Marie Goldman from Chelmsford and Malden, who wishes to speak in favour of the motion.
Thank you, Conference. My name's Marie Goldman. I'm the parliamentary candidate for Chelmsford, and I'd like to tell you about Sam. Sam is a 14-year-old boy who lives in my home city. For a teenager, he takes pretty good care of his teeth. His parents have always made sure that teeth brushing is part of his twice-daily routine, even though when he was little, being asked to brush his teeth in the mornings and at bedtime always seemed to come as just a bit of a surprise to him. But despite having well cared for teeth, he's had a couple of issues. These are mainly to do with the way his adult teeth have grown, without his baby teeth making space for them. A couple of years ago, at a routine appointment that had been delayed by the pandemic, like for so many other people, Sam describes the relief of finally having a persistent baby tooth pulled out by the dentist. Now, for the squeamish amongst you, feel free to close your ears now, but he said the pop that it made as it came out was the most satisfying thing that he had ever experienced. A while ago, a similar problem developed on the other side of his mouth, and now he's been waiting nearly 18 months to see the orthodontist. Meanwhile, he's growing more and more self-conscious of his irregular teeth, sometimes covering them up when he smiles, and, conference, he does have a gorgeous smile. The wait to see a specialist seems to be going on forever. The alternative to waiting for an NHS dentist would be to pay hundreds of pounds for a private appointment. Now, Sam's parents may well be able to afford that, but thousands of parents of other children can't. Private dental care is not the answer. Children's teeth are changing all the time. Even if they brush their teeth well every day, problems can still develop. It's for exactly these reasons that children are supposed to have a checkup with a dentist every year to catch the issues early on and prevent bigger, sometimes very costly problems later in life. But the figures show that across the country, and even in a relatively wealthy area like Chelmsford, fewer than half of children are getting an annual checkup. And even if they do, they face unacceptably long waits for specialist services like orthodontists. We talk so much about health services, and rightly so, but dentistry is an important part of our health, and we must look after it. That's especially true for children. Dental care needs to be free, not just for those who can afford it. Let's not forget that 1/3 of children are living in poverty. That's today, on our watch. Conference, we are duty-bound to do whatever we can to look after our young people, and that includes giving them the confidence of a bright and healthy smile, with a set of teeth that will hopefully be with them for the rest of their life. Conference, please support this motion and amendment to protect access to dental services. Let's make sure that poor dental health is never a reason for children not to smile. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marie. And that was Marie's first time speaking at conference. I think you'll agree that she was very good. I now call Lee Darg from Central Birmingham, and can I ask Hannah Kitching from Barnsley to please stand by?
Good morning, conference. Wow, isn't it good to be back? You do all look fantastic. Welcome back to conference. Thank you for this motion put together. Daisy, Red, Richard, and shout out to Shal, who led the Lord's Health team before Richard. A phenomenal amount of work is done by this team in the background, and I really hope you appreciate all the work outside of this motion as well that's been put into healthcare, and especially much more in the press and the media as well, which is fantastic. So thank you for the work you all do in the team. One of the things I'm known for moaning about, I suppose, is the reminder that when we're in the media and so on, we need to be reminding people what liberalism is and why it's a force for good in the country. Well, liberalism says that everybody should be able to live their life the way they wish it, of course, without harming others. But if we have children who are suffering with bad healthcare in terms of their teeth from a very, very young age, if your very start in life is hampered by poor health, that's going to affect your education, that's going to affect your friendships and relationships, how on earth is that a liberal way to treat our children in this country when we can afford to have good healthcare, we can afford for people to have good dentistry? So this motion is very much needed, and often Liberals talk about things that no one else will, and it's strange that something so basic and simple as dentistry is left up to us to pick up the pieces for. And as the motion set out, I support the amendment as well, as the motion set out, it's much more than just recruitment. I see Labour are kind of saying recruitment is the answer for everything. Well, it's part of the picture, but it's the culture as well. As mentioned, there are people in dentistry who are going to private practice to make sure that they can afford to pay their own bills. And also the magic word of prevention, magic in that it's attractive but perhaps not real. We all say prevention is needed in healthcare, but it's very often not delivered. And indeed, there's a perverse incentive in dentistry to almost wait in NHS dentistry for teeth to go wrong, because you're given quite a good sum to be able to pull the teeth out. Whereas the dentists themselves would rather give much better education on preventative measures, proper teeth cleaning and proper support for parents and their children as well. So this motion is a fantastic range. It's very liberal to me, because if we get health right at an early age, children will grow up to be healthier adults and be able to live their lives the way they wish to. So thanks again to the team for putting this together, and I hope you vote for this motion and the amendment. Oh, that's already in, isn't it? Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much, Lee. Would Steve Bolter from Chelmsford and Malden please stand by? And I now call Hannah Kitching, who is the leader of Barnsley Liberal Democrats.
Thank you. Hello, Conference. Good to be back, as everyone else has said. I'm very happy to speak today in favour of this motion, because this is exactly the kind of policy that we should be adopting as a national political party. On the ground, we find out what the issues are that are affecting our residents, and we try to tackle it. So in summary, this is good national policy which is going to turn into great election-winning local campaigns for us all, and I urge everyone to vote in favour of it today. Thank you very much, Conference.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Would Jackie Bell from East Lothian please stand by? And I now call Steve Bolter from Chelmsford and Malden, who also wishes to speak in favour of the motion. Or it appears does not appear to be in the hall. which is helpful. Jackie, are you ready to come up straight away? Okay, well, that means, can I ask Michael Mullaney from Bosworth to please stand by? And I now call Jackie Bell from East Lothian, who wishes to speak in favour of the motion.
Conference. Historically, barbers pull teeth. The red and white pole signifies the blood and bandages. It's shocking that in 21st century Britain, some people must resort to medieval methods and pull their own teeth due to a lack of NHS care. Universal access to dental care is vital. Dentists can pick up a range of oral issues, including oral cancer. Regular hygiene visits and preventative care can offset decay and extraction. Children need early learning in tooth care to prevent decay of adult teeth. Some may need orthodontics. My son was very lucky. He's 42, never had a filling. COVID impacted services, but recovery has been limited. Some places are dental deserts as staff has retired or left NHS work. English problems are seen in Scotland too, despite what the SNP say. Lib Dems in coalition established free checks for all and a new dental school. But the SNP have allowed services to rot, most recently under Health Minister and leadership hopeful Humza Yousaf. Dunbar and East Linton ward, where I live, has a growing population but no NHS dentist, even for minors whose parents are not signed up to a private plan. The same is seen across Scotland with a two-tier system that divides those who can and cannot pay. Scottish Lib Dems have been calling for action and an NHS recovery plan that includes dentistry, but the SNP have failed to act. In February, a Lib Dem motion calling for reform was defeated in Holyrood by the SNP and Greens. Conference. Universal access to dental care is essential. It must not depend on ability to pay. Without investment and incentivisation of the workforce to promote NHS care, we are setting up a destiny of decay for too many. We are also seeing how far people have to travel. In fact, in the last week, people going back to Ukraine because it's easier to get a dental appointment there in a war zone than in Scotland. Therefore, Conference, please support the motion and the amendment. It's all really good stuff. Let's show the Conservatives and up in Scotland, the SNP and Greens, what we really care. We must protect the pearly whites of all for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. Can I ask Lord Allen to please stand by? And I now call Michael Mullaney from Bosworth, who is also in favour of the motion.
The lack of dentists and the high cost of private dentistry is an issue that concerns many people I speak to in Hinckley and Bosworth. And they want to hear someone talk about the issue and offer plans to deal with the problem. So thank goodness one party, our party, the Liberal Democrats, are highlighting this issue so publicly at our conference. The first policy debate at an in-person national Lib Dem conference for 3.5 years, and it's on an issue, the lack of access to NHS dentistry, that so many residents tell me they are concerned about. In Leicestershire, where I am, we have the appalling situation where, according to a recent survey, no NHS dentists, no dentists in Leicestershire were taking on new NHS adult patients. And dental treatment is costly. At a time when people are worried about how to pay their spiralling fuel bills, worried about how to pay rising mortgage and rent costs, worried about how to pay rising food costs, it's no surprise that many people just can't afford private dentistry bills. And that leads to the horror of DIY dentistry, where people, in order to try and deal with the pain or the dental pain that's clouding their lives, resort to avoiding professional help and anaesthetics and just using pliers to deal with the problem. And it's not just DIY dentistry that is a negative outcome of the lack of access to dentists. Rates of mouth cancer have risen by a third in the last 10 years and more than doubled in the last 20 years. While survival rates for many cancers have risen in recent years, there's been no similar rise in mouth cancer survival rates. And one of the main reasons is late diagnosis. More than half of mouth cancers are only found at stage 4, the most advanced stage of cancer. And lack of dental visits is contributing to this lack of diagnosis. So more people sadly getting mouth cancer and more strain on the NHS. The reality is this Tory government has let people down on so many levels. Crashing the economy in the Liz Truss mini-budget, partying when people couldn't mourn their dead properly, giving us changes of government ministers every 5 minutes. But the worst failure has been on our NHS. If this Tory government cannot be trusted with our NHS, cannot be trusted with the nation's health, then they cannot be trusted on anything. And the quicker we get them out of office, the better. And we Liberal Democrats can contribute to getting them out of office, taking seats off them at the next election, by putting forward policies that will improve the lives of people in their everyday lives. And this policy and this amendment and motion will improve people's lives. Vote for it today. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Michael. I now call Lord Allen from Kensington and Chelsea, who is our health spokesperson in the Lords, to summate the motion.
Thank you, Conference. And this is a government that we have today that's not known for its honesty, but fortunately the civil servants that work for them continue to lay out the reality in briefings that they've been giving to us in the House of Lords. And what they said in a recent briefing was that NHS dental appointment availability has fallen from 97% in 2012 to 82% in 2022 for people who already are registered with an NHS dentist. But for those trying to get a first appointment, the success rate has fallen from 77% in 2012 to 31% in 2022. So 7 in 10 people who try to register for NHS dentistry across the country are told no. And the report goes on to say that access in the southwest and east of England are generally poor, particularly in rural and coastal areas. And I know there are many people in this room who would be able to confirm those facts. Today, Conference, we've heard important testimony about the human cost that result from those dry statistics. Marie Goldman from Chelmsford and Malden highlighted the critical issue of long waits for orthodontics that 14-year-old Sam Brave, Sam, I'm not sure I would have celebrated a pop like he did, is facing. Lee Darg from Central Birmingham, who makes a huge contribution to our national work, running a group called the Lib Dem Health and Social Care Member Association. I'd urge you to talk to him if you're interested in these issues, made the Liberal case for why this matters. Hannah Kitchen from Barnsley talked about the social costs of government failures in the communities where she works. And Jackie Bell from East Lothian gave us the memorable phrase, medieval methods, perhaps apt for a tourist visit for York, but not for dentistry in 2023. And she importantly reminded us that this is a UK-wide problem where the government in Scotland is equally culpable of not delivering the services that people need. Michael Mullaney in Hinckley and Bosworth, again, talked about an NHS dentistry desert in the middle of the country and how it can affect serious conditions like cancer. Conference, passing this motion and the amendment and our campaigning work in our local areas, as well as in Parliament, are ways for us to tell the government that people do care about NHS dentistry and that they will hold Conservatives to account for their neglect of this essential service. It's hard to be optimistic about a change of direction when we have a government that is allowing health inequalities to widen across the board, to the shame of our nation. But this will not be cost-free, as they will find out in elections over coming years. Conference, I urge you to support the motion and the amendment.
Thank you very much, Your Lordship. We will now move to a pair of votes. So first I'm going to ask for you to vote whether or not you're in favour of the amendment, and then I'm going to ask you to vote whether or not you're in favour of the motion as amended or not, depending on how you vote on the amendment. So, can I please see all those who are in favour of accepting the amendment holding up their voting cards now? Thank you very much. And all those against? Okay, and that's quite clearly carried in the hall. We'll just wait for the online. Okay, the amendment is very clearly carried, so I would now like to ask all those who would like to vote in favour of the motion as amended to show their voting cards now, please. Thank you very much. And any against? And again, we just need to wait briefly for the online. Apologies that that's taking a little moment, teething problems with our new online voting system, but I am happy to announce that that motion has passed. And I would like to thank my aide Sam Barrett and my hall aide Paul McGarry, and I now hand over to Chris Adams to chair the next session.
Good morning, conference. If everyone could please take their seats for the start of the debate and maybe quieten down at the front. Thank you very much. Shh. Thank you. We're about to start the debate on F6, Code of Conduct, which you will find on page 74 of the printed conference agenda. There are no amendments to this motion, as the motion is unamendable. Conference is being asked to ratify the Code of Conduct. Can I ask Shafak Mohammed, can I ask Sarah Chung-Johnson to please stand by? And I now call Mary Renier-Wilson to move the Code of Conduct.
Hello, conference. I'm a first-time speaker, and honestly, very probably a last-time speaker, because whilst you're all lovely, I much prefer talking to Connect rather than talking to conference. But I'm up here because this Members' Code of Conduct is important.
It's important because our members are important. We demand a lot of our members, and you deliver for us, literally. Whether it be travelling miles to win by-elections, stuffing thousands of envelopes, devising the brilliant policy that we're all voting on this weekend, or running councils in the most challenging circumstances. In return, our party should be a safe place for all of our members, where every single one of us can be fulfilled and engaged, where every single one of us knows what is expected of us, and where every single one of us can get the training, support, and encouragement to enable us to achieve what we want to achieve. Too often in the past, that hasn't been the case. This code of conduct is not some magic wand that's going to completely change our party culture and fix all the problems, but it is a really important step towards doing so. The hard work of a lot of people over the past few years has made our broken disciplinary process significantly better, but not having a code of conduct that's been ratified by conference and our membership has been a problem for them. Having 3 different codes of conduct has been a problem for them. And having a majority of our members not even know that our codes of conduct exist has been a problem. So the Federal People and Development Committee, of which I, until very recently, was the chair, was tasked with creating a new code. It wasn't an easy process. There were lots of views in our party, and we had to have a thorough consultation process to capture them all. And then the code went through a lot of different iterations, with changes at every level of every stage of the process. And not everyone is going to think that this code is perfect. I don't think it's perfect forever, but it is significantly better than the multiple documents it replaces. And importantly, it's 27% shorter. Mark Pack did actually count the words. Some people think that it could be shorter still, but honestly, every single time we tried to take something out, somebody came up with something else that was really essential to put back in. I think what we've left with is a code of conduct document that sets out the behaviour we expect from our members, both in person and online. A code that sets out how the party will support our members with training, with encouragement, with the opportunity to take leave from party posts. And a code that emphasises that those with power within our party, both inside the party and on external bodies, should hold themselves and expect to be held to a higher standard of behaviour. That they need to not only behave in ways that don't fall foul of our disciplinary processes, but that they have a responsibility to support and encourage others within the party. We want to create a liberal society where we champion the freedom, dignity, and well-being of every individual and respect their rights to develop their talents to the full. First of all, we have to create a party that does that. I think that this code of conduct is a really important step on the way to doing that. So please vote for the motion, ratify this code, and let our party's disciplinary process get on with its job. And then the rest of us can get on with our job of winning elections. Not just because beating Tories is really, really good fun, but so that we can create that liberal society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mary. And as she stated that, she's a first-time speaker. Incredible to think it. Can I now ask Stephen Hart to please stand by, and I call Sarah Chung Johnson, Chair of Chinese Lib Dems, to speak in favour of the motion.
Hello, Conference. Firstly, I'd like to thank those who put together this code of conduct and commend them on its simplification and ensuring clarity of rules that will enable the party to act fairly and quickly to resolve these issues. However, speaking as someone from a minority, the most important part of this code of conduct is protecting our members. There are times as a minority when you may be the only person in a room that looks like you or is similar to you. And sometimes that experience can be an uncomfortable one. And it can make you feel othered. It can make you feel like you are silenced. Unfortunately, there are instances where people specifically wish to make you feel unwelcome for who you fundamentally are, often with no lived experience of being in that minority or empathetic understanding of what it's like to be in that minority and what that means. They use stereotypes, they employ scare stories, and even debate your right to exist. They deny the rights to individuals to be who they are themselves, and that is fundamentally not liberal or democratic. I don't want anyone to ever feel that way in our party. The very thank you. The very fundamentals of our party's constitution are to uphold a fair, free and open society, and we must start with our own party. Sadly, I've also witnessed bullying of staff members by those in this party. Only recently, I was in a party conference call where staff were named and shamed over matters that could have been dealt with privately and not within the meeting itself, and certainly without the hectoring, bordering on abusive tone that was used on them. Again, I want us to state in our code of conduct that this is not acceptable. Staff should not be expected to have this, to take this, and it has no place in our party. Please, thank you. Let's not get bogged down in endless debate, as we Lib Dems like to do. Why should we, as Liberals, even be intellectualising a debate about the rights of individuals, but most especially minorities? Because that is the way of bigotry. Conference, please vote for this motion as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Can I ask Lucy Tong to please stand by? And I now call Stephen Hart from North Edinburgh, East and Leith to speak in favour of the motion.
Good morning, Conference. My first federal conference, first speaker too. Conference, I've been lucky enough to serve as part of the disciplinary subgroup in the Federal Party. What we do is we don't get involved in any of the disciplinary matters at all. I don't even know what disciplinary matters are going on in the party. But what we do is make sure our system is independent, efficient and effective. That is our goal, and we're led by the wonderful Candy Piercy in that. I'm speaking on behalf of this motion today on a personal capacity because it's important that our panels get clear guidance as to what we accept of people. So when they do their function of deciding whether conduct is worthy of disciplinary proceedings, they have got that clear and unambiguous guidance to allow them to be independent, to allow them to be effective, to allow them to be efficient. Also, Conference, we hear a lot of debate about freedom of speech. Each and every Liberal here supports freedom of speech. But let's be honest. We support everyone's right to speak, but not everybody's speech is valid within a Liberal Party. Suella Braverman our Home Secretary, has the right to her views. Her views have no place in our party. This code tells our panels, when they're doing disciplinary matters, how they should judge matters, and it also gives all of us guidance on how we should behave. I could make mistakes. We all can make mistakes in our conduct. This code helps us to move to a place where we're less likely to make those mistakes and behave liberally in all that we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And as Stephen stated, he is a first-time speaker at Federal Conference. Can I now ask David Barnsdale to please stand by, and I call Lucy Tong from Harrow Borough to speak in favour of the motion.
So I'm the current Accessibility, Diversity and Standards Officer for the Young Liberals. A lot of our members go on to make significant contributions to committees throughout the party and various party bodies. One of the main things that I do in my job is to try and make sure that particularly YL, but the party is a welcoming place for a diverse group of young people. And this is very difficult to do when those young people do not trust, for example, the disciplinary process and do not trust that they are going to be able to be protected from harassment and make sure that they feel safe in the party. This code of conduct is incredibly important because it makes sure that we're able to hold people in our party to account and make sure that the views that we have of how the country as a whole should be, we're able to actually hold the people within the party to those same standards. It's also incredibly important that we're able to hold people who have more power in the party to a higher standard, because those people have far more influence, not just in the House of Commons and the House of Lords, but on social media. They have much bigger followings, and they are able to influence a lot more people. So quite rightly, we should be able to hold them to a higher standard than we hold the average member. It's incredibly important that we make sure that that is ratified. So I encourage you to vote for the Code of Conduct.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Can I ask Wendy Chamberlain to please stand by, and I now call David Barnsdale from Kingston Borough to speak against the motion.
Hi there. I've been in two minds about this motion. First off, we are making membership of the party conditional on complete agreement with the preamble of the Constitution. If you think that's a good idea, I suggest you read the preamble in full. Really read it and think of it as not as something that's a nice aspiration, but something that we seriously implemented. For instance, what is it? Oppose all forms of entrenched privilege and inequality. Who could be against that? We have a head of state who is there solely due to entrenched privilege. If the party voted to abolish the monarchy as our policy through a democratic debate, I would welcome that. But are we seriously going to expel people simply because they aren't on board with republicanism? On the other hand, there is, for the first time, a commitment to free speech. Free speech is essential if we are going to make valid decisions. Unless you've heard the other side of the argument, you have no confidence in anything you've made. And also, if we go out into the outside world, we are going to have to defend our views. So even if you actually disagree with the opposition, you'll getting to understand why people are against what you think. As J.S. Mill said, "He who knows only his side of the case knows little of that." The new Code of Conduct defends freedom of speech in one hand and essentially rejects it in the other. It is a messy compromise, but that's what compromises are. And I respect the people who have worked hard to get this compromise, so I grudgingly ask you to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Can I now ask Toby Keynes to please stand by, and I now call Wendy Chamberlain, our Chief Whip, to speak in favour of the motion.
Good morning, Conference. Spring 2016 was my first federal conference, and it's my absolute pleasure to stand in front of you this morning as an MP for this party in person for the first time. I've also now been Chief Whip for 2.5 years, becoming Chief Whip after only 9 months as an MP. I think my background in policing and HR might have had something to do with that. And it's been a great pleasure to see off multiple Tory Chief Whips in that time. But I'm very conscious that my role of Chief Whip is not just about ensuring our MPs vote as we would like them to do and aligned with our policy, but it's also about welfare and it's about standards. And that's not just standards of our MPs, it's standards for our staff and it's welfare for our staff and our members as well. As Mary rightly said, there are people in this party who have positions of power, and I'm very conscious that I am in one. I care deeply about those standards, and I'm proud of our recent record as a party. Particularly compared to others, name no names, but I might have already mentioned them. But I also care about winning seats so that as Lib Dems, our fantastic vision for a fairer and better society can actually be implemented. So I'm really proud that despite the impacts of COVID, despite the fact that we've not been together for so long, the party has taken forward a number of changes through the Thornhill report and implemented a range of options from that. Part of those are our internal structures and our new federal board, and part of that is the work that we've been doing to look at code of conducts. So this code of conduct has been approved by federal board. I think there is a lot of good things in there. I think it's really important when we think about standards, we're not just thinking about upholding those and protecting people who feel that they have been let down, but it's also giving people who have fallen foul of those standards a position to show where they have gone wrong and hopefully help them to do better in future. Please support this code of conduct. It will make it easier for me and other decision makers in the standards arena to do our work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Can I now ask Hannah Kitchen to please stand by, and I call Toby Keynes from Brighton and Hove to speak in favour of the motion. Toby.
Good morning, Conference. You may be aware that there's a group of party members who really do not like another group of party members, and that is those of us who dare to believe that one half of mankind has different physical characteristics from the other half, that those differences between the sexes really matter in all sorts of ways, and that people born female come off far worse than people born male unless the state acts to protect those rights, their dignity, and their safety. In your conference extra, there are no fewer than 14 questions that are clearly targeting us. We're described as hate mongers who indulge in discriminatory rants and put the safety of trans members at risk of harassment and abuse. One questioner even attacked the Equality Act because it now protects us from discrimination even within this party. Elsewhere, party members have accused us of wanting to commit trans genocide, which we don't. The LGB Liberal Forum, which I chair, has been denounced as a hate group, which it isn't. Our beliefs have been denounced by an official party committee as equivalent to white supremacism and anti-Semitism. It is hard to imagine a more appalling smear, and it is totally unfounded. But this is what happens when a group, any group, is attacked and is regularly silenced so that it's not able to defend itself. And anybody else trying to defend this group is also attacked and silenced and abused. Because allegations cannot be countered, they become more and more extreme and divorced from reality. The group is demonized, painted as a vicious enemy within that presents a physical danger to others just by being present. We're not. We present no physical threat to anyone. But the more extreme the language, the more the fear is ratcheted up, the more the danger to us may become very real. So I support the new code of conduct. It isn't perfect, as has been said, but it does say that Liberal Democrats should always act with respect towards each other, and that's something that's been desperately lacking. It requires its members to agree with the party's fundamental values and objectives, and those values include freedom from prejudice and discrimination on the grounds of belief, as well as sex. It encourages members to engage in robust and passionate debate, but to play the ball, not the person, and to be measured in their criticism. We could do with a lot less personal abuse. And finally, it declares that party moderators must never use their powers to silence views with which they personally disagree. If we are able to speak for ourselves, to defend our beliefs and to explain them, to counter the appalling things that are said about us, then the fears may subside. The witch hunts may cease, and the party I love may find its way back to sanity, to civilized discussion, and to liberal values. Please support the Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Toby. As a friendly reminder to conference, before I call the next speaker, we do listen to each other out of respect. Please do not heckle speakers as they are speaking in the hall. We can have a very respectful discussion without the heckling. So please bear that in mind in future. Thank you very much. I now call Hannah Kitching. I ask John Grout to please stand by, and I call Hannah Kitching to speak in favour of the motion from Barnsley Lib Dems.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Conference. Very happy to bring the debate on the Code of Conduct firmly back on topic this morning. I'm also very happy I'm also very happy to speak in favour of this code of conduct, and in doing so, I want to thank all of the individuals, many of whom are volunteers doing this in their own time, who have put so much time and effort and work into developing this new code of conduct. I have a number of roles in the party, both currently on the regional executive in Yorkshire and the Humber, right here, in fact. I've previously been on the local executive, and I'm also our council group leader. And in all of those roles, I often, unfortunately, not often, let's be fair, it's not often, on occasion, I have to deal with issues that involve members' behaviour. And those issues are particularly distressing when they concern how members treat party staff. Our party staff work so very, very hard. They work so many hours, particularly at election time, for, let's be honest, not the greatest pay on earth. And they deserve to be treated at all times with dignity and respect. Sadly, and Sarah Chung-Johnson already gave an example of this in her speech earlier, that is not always the case. When staff members are not treated with respect, we must be able to hold those people to account, and those members are often people in positions of relative power. The existing 3 codes of conduct simply do not allow us to do that, and that puts our staff at risk of sustaining damage to their mental health and well-being, and also at risk of leaving the party and us losing them and all of their skills and expertise. This new, single, simplified code of conduct is a huge improvement on what we currently have and has been widely consulted on across the party. I really hope that Conference is able to ratify and support it today, as I will be doing myself. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much, Hannah. Can I now ask Dr. Mark Pack to please stand by to submit the motion, and I now call John Grout from Reading to speak in favour of the motion.
Thanks, Chair. Hello, Conference. Good to be back in person. Some of you may know me online as one of the admins of Lib Dem Newbies UK, which is the largest members' Facebook group in the party. And I'm pleased to say that over the last few years, particularly since the EU referendum, we've welcomed literally thousands of new members who've been elected to just about every level of the party, internally and externally, including at least one MP and MEPs as well. One thing that I've found as an admin of Lib Dem Newbies, for everyone's awareness, the admins are all volunteers. We all do it in our spare time. No one is in charge. There is a committee of, unofficial committee, if you like, of admins who discuss all the decisions we make before we make them. Over the last few years, the tone of debate online in Facebook groups has sometimes been very passionate. And having had this members' code of conduct to review, I think, honestly, if we had had it a few years ago, it would have made online debate in the Lib Dem groups that I am part of much better. From the perspective of an admin, it would have been fairer on us as volunteers and also fairer on members of these groups to know what is expected of them and the standards that they can be held to. There have been multiple different iterations over the last few years, including the introduction of an online code of conduct, which this new code of conduct massively improves upon. I'm not going to repeat what others have said, but my huge thanks go to the FPDC and everyone else who's worked on this, most particularly Mary. But I do think this is something that will be a material step forward in our ability to manage ourselves, our internal debate, and the culture within our party, and I urge you all to support it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. And I'll call Dr. Mark Pack, President of the Liberal Democrats, to summate on the motion.
Thank you, Chris. I suspect, like me, you've been appalled at the stories about the behaviour of Dominic Raab or Gavin Williamson or Priti Patel and how they never seem to be held accountable for how they behave towards others. And we're right to be appalled, but we should also be careful not to be hypocrites. We're right to be appalled, but we must also make sure that we have our own house in order. And this code is crucial for that. It's also crucial because, as other speakers have mentioned, and as our General Election Review report sadly highlighted, and as
Our surveys of party staff also sadly highlights far too often members do not treat staff with the respect that they deserve, and we need to therefore be better. This code is also important, I think, because of the positives in it. The positive reference to training, the positive reference to pastoral support, the positive references to, for example, being able to take temporary leave from posts if you're seriously ill or have caring responsibilities. And I should pay particular tribute to Karen Lindsay for her especially assiduous lobbying of myself and others on that point during this new code's creation. It's also a code that is technically better than what it replaces. It replaces 3 different codes with one. It replaces 1,641 words with 1,194. Yes, Mary is right, I did count them. It is 27% shorter than what we have at the moment. It's also clearer. And on David Barnsdale's point from earlier, it deliberately uses the phrase fundamental values because that's the phrase that we use in so much else of our complaints and our membership operation. And the clarity of consistency, I would say, is an advantage, not a drawback. It is also a shorter code than, for example, Amnesty International, UK's Code of Conduct for Activists, or to pick another organisation that may be popular with many people in the hall, with the Campaign for Real Ale's similar code. So this code has been carefully consulted on over a long period of time, and it quite rightly would hold people like me to a higher standard. Because if, say, you're a new member who's only just joined the party and you tweet something inadvisable, that isn't as damaging to the party's reputation as if, say, somebody like me does. And it's absolutely right that you should, as I hope you will do in a moment in ratifying the code, is expect more of people like myself. Obviously, very much hope I'm not hoisting myself by my own petard there, and will read my next tweet before I send it very carefully. But please, therefore, vote to ratify this new code. It's shorter, it's clearer, it's more supportive of staff and colleagues. And it says to us all, let's do our very best to live up to our values, because that is what we should do as Liberals. So please ratify this code. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Now, as conference may have realised over the past few debates, it takes a little bit longer to vote online. So I'm going to open the vote online now before I then explain what we do. I'm also going to say that I'm very sorry I couldn't call more people in the debate. We had about double the number of cards, so sincere apologies to those that we couldn't call. We simply didn't have time. I would like now to move to the vote in the hall. As a reminder, you must be sat down to vote, so please take your seats quickly as we move to the vote. So can I please see all in favour of the motion? Thank you very much, conference. And can I please see all against the motion? I'll just check the online vote. I think that is very clearly carried. Thank you very much, conference. I'd like to thank my aides, Jenny Rigg up here and Alison Jenner in the hall, and I'll now be passing on to Chris Mains, who will be chairing the next debate on standing order amendments.
Good morning, conference. We're moving to F7, which is a debate on the selection of policy motions at conference. This is an amendment to standing orders, so we'll require a 2/3 majority when we come to vote. So can I ask Hannah Kitchen to stand by, and I call Michael Berwick Gooding to move the motion, which has been submitted by the Basingstoke and Dean local party.
Good morning, Conference. We pride ourselves on the idea that party members make policy at conference. There is an idea that any member can write a motion, get the required support and submit it to conference, and the members will then discuss it. The reality is different. Imagine you have spent weeks working on your motion. You submitted it for drafting advice and you have made some suggested changes. You got the support needed to submit it and have submitted it. Then you wait to hear if it was selected. So after all that work, your motion is rejected. The odds are against you. For this conference, 32 policy motions were not selected for debate. 5 were selected, and 2 of them accompanied policy papers, and at least 1, I believe, was submitted by our MPs. If this standing order amendment is passed, those registered for conference will have a say on which of the 37 motions submitted we would debate. Perhaps both nuclear weapon motions would have ended up in the ballot, and perhaps members would have selected to debate the one on the United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons rather than one selected by FCC. For spring conference, it is likely, if this motion is passed, that members will select one policy motion for debate. For autumn conference, I hope that at least 2 policy motions would be selected by members registered for conference. Currently, Federal Conference Committee seem to be able to reject motions for any reason. The reasons given as to why motions that I have helped write have been rejected include: it contains very large uncosted spending commitments. The idea has been debated and rejected by the party in the past, but when this was not specified. It covers a great deal of ground with a large number of specific points, and this type of motion is generally only acceptable with a policy paper. It was a somewhat diffuse motion that covered a range of issues. They received many more motions than can be debated in the time available. They felt that there were other motions that had a stronger case to be selected at that time. If you look in the standing orders, you will see that in 6.1 that proposers may appeal the rejection of their motion, and that appeal will be allowed if the reasons given for rejecting it are not valid. But you'll look in vain for a list of valid reasons for the rejection of motions. How can you point out the reasons your motion being rejected were not valid when there is no list of valid reasons? The proposed new 4.2 would resolve this by providing a list of valid reasons for FCC to use when rejecting motions. Just as in Standing Orders 4.3 regarding amendments to the Constitution and Standing Orders and 4.4 regarding emergency motions, the new 4.2 uses the word may. I hope that if this motion is passed, as with Standing Order 4.3 and 4.4, there would be an expectation that FCC would not select policy motions for the reasons set out in the Standing Order. Lines 40 to 41 have been included and a drafting amendment accepted so that the 2 years after a general election, hopefully there would be an expectation to disregard the 2-year rule in clauses 4.2b and 4.2e. The reasons listed in 4.2 are often used and are the ones which I think are good reasons for not selecting a motion. I have some concerns regarding G, as Nick Da Costa, in his report on why motions were not selected for this conference, used the need for drafting support or needs additional work 12 times. At least once this was because the motion was very wide-ranging. All those motions where FCC do not select due to a lack of time, if this motion is passed, would be in the ballot for members to decide which should be discussed. All of those motions where there is no valid reason not to select them, if this motion is passed, will be in the ballot for members of the party who have registered for conference to decide which should be debated. As a two-thirds majority is needed to pass this standing order amendment, please vote in favour of it.
Thank you, Michael. Can I ask Oliver Jones-Lyons to stand by, and I call Hannah Kitchen from Barnsley and Penistone.
Thank you, Chris. Hello again, conference. As a regular member of the Liberal Democrats, when I look at the agenda for conference, I find the large number of motions that are in there quite overwhelming. There's a lot of information contained in those policy motions. But actually, what gets taken forward and put into that agenda is, as already described, just a tiny selection of those motions. For this conference, there were over 45 motions submitted, of which we have only had time to put on the agenda and debate 5. As a member of Federal Conference Committee, which I now am, although I'm not today speaking on behalf of Federal Conference Committee, I have to read and understand and decide which of those 45 motions we take forwards. I do that with a huge amount of support from a variety of experts, people with knowledge on all of the different policy and topic areas, who feed that all in to enable us, as members of FCC, to choose which are the best and most appropriate motions to put on the agenda for conference. Imagine, as a member of conference, having to wade through all of those 45 submitted motions. For me, personally, that would be completely overwhelming, and it would be something that would disengage me from the conference process. How can our membership plan to come to conference to know if there's going to be something exciting, something that resonates with them on the agenda to debate, if we cannot set the agenda for conference ahead of it in good time? How can we communicate to the press and the media what the Liberal Democrats are going to be discussing at conference if that's all left to a ballot on the morning of each day of conference? That just seems too difficult, too overwhelming, and too opaque. We are a democratic party, a national political party that wants to win elections, which sets its policy at conference by votes from members. But we need to ensure that that policy is something that we can campaign on and that can help us to win elections. And most importantly, that it's coherent, valid policy that makes sense. How can we set policy when we have no scope for amendments? We need to allow our membership to see what policy motions are on the agenda for conference well in advance so that they can submit amendments that may even improve on those motions or alter them and allow us to debate that further. I do appreciate, as someone now very heavily involved in the current process, that it is not perfect. But it is better than what has been proposed here because it allows us to plan and anticipate and amend. Members, we set policy at conference. Let's continue to do it the way that we do now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannah. Can I ask Lucas North to stand by, and I call Oliver Jones-Lyons to speak specifically on lines 42 to 55. Thanks, Oliver.
Hello. I put in the speakers' cards against the motion in an effort essentially to reach out to the proposers. If I'd been a tad bit more organised before conference, I would have suggested a separate vote on the reasons section and the balloting section. The reasons are well drafted, and I think would add the standing orders. I'd suggest including perhaps one or two more reasons relating to debates that would likely or probably lead to breaches of the membership code of conduct, and rejecting motions that are in some way outside of the values, aims and objectives of the Liberal Democrats. But otherwise, the reasons are pretty well crafted. I do think a future conference should consider some form of revised version of this motion. I think the reasons given this motion could form part of an actually meaningful conference appeal system, as opposed to the current one, which attempts to provide some form of recourse. And I think, for example, circumstances change, it would be a functional appeal system. But realistically, it doesn't provide recourse to challenge FCC decisions. Reform of appeals should really be part of any future motion that reforms or changes the selection process. I'm not convinced ballots are the way to go, which might have been a shock if you've seen me at the online conferences previously. If we have a robust set of reasons for valid rejection, I think most of the concerns that members, especially the members who perhaps are more inclined to back ballots, that it would address most of those concerns. Realistically, if the motion was worked on, perhaps even by FCC, a system could come back which retains the FCC's power of prioritisation and scheduling, which Hannah just mentioned is really important, which they can exercise with, again, as Hannah said, the democratic mandate that we give them at the federal elections. If we have a more robust appeals process with limited reasons for outright rejection, but still retain FCC scheduling prioritisation power with perhaps some form of waiting lists, very similar to the way currently FCC suggests resubmitting motions to future conferences, the system can perhaps become a bit less opaque, because I think that's really the issue. It's more the opacity and lack of understanding by regular members. Motions would still get rejected. FCC would still have to budget limited time. But people are ultimately still going to be disappointed whether you pass this motion or not. Conference, I am going to ask you to vote against this motion, but I hope this will lead to a conversation, in fact, some substantive reform down the line. Conference rejections can seem like a mystery and opaque. Let's move this forward at a future conference.
Thank you very much. Can Jenny Riggs stand by? And I call Lucas North, who wishes to speak in favour of the motion.
Hello, Conference. One of the things I find most exciting about being a member of the Liberal Democrats is that I get to have a say on our party policy. We here in this room get to set what our party believe in. So when we go out and campaign for Liberal Democrat candidates, we know we're campaigning for a party that believes in the same things as we do, because we set our vision and we set our policy. And I think that's a really important part of how the party is set up. But currently, there is a committee of a relatively small number of people who act as a buffer between what the membership want to debate and what the membership are allowed to debate. They effectively act as a way to filter what opinions we're allowed to express at conference. I personally don't think that's the most democratic way of handling things. There is nothing in this motion that would require the ballot to happen on the day of conference. It could happen a few days after the deadline for submission of motions. It could happen well in advance of conference, so that amendments can happen, so that we can show up to conference knowing what's on the agenda well in advance. It could be timed to coincide with the deadline for early bird registration. So we encourage early registrations for conference because it means you get to have a say on what will be on the agenda. There are many ways that this could be made to work if FCC were willing to make it work, because the motion includes the line that the ballot will be held at a date chosen by FCC. There is no requirement and there is no inherent flaw in this motion that would somehow break our party democracy by allowing a bit more of it. The truth is that this works well in other organisations, in other democratic, member-led organisations like ours. Members who attend conference and set policy are allowed to have a say on what will be on the agenda and the order things will be debated in, so that things that matter most to us are what we pass our policy on. Now, I am able to read a room, and I recognise that I may be in the minority here, or at least not in a two-thirds majority. So I would urge you to vote for this motion, but in the event that it falls, I would urge FCC and others to think about how we could incorporate the principles of this motion and the principles of allowing our members to have more of a say in our future policy debates. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. Can I ask Alistair Carmichael to stand by, and I call Jenny Rigg from Calderdale.
Good morning, Conference. I was going to make a joke about I bet you're sick of the sight of me, but then I saw Hannah up on stage again and thought, no, maybe I'm not the... I don't disagree with anything that Lucas said about internal party democracy. You all know me. I am the troublemaker. I am the one that causes all the difficulties for all the people. And I'm very much in favour of party democracy. But I don't think that this particular measure would really make things that much more democratic. Because FCC is elected by all of you. And we are elected because we are willing to put in the hours and hours and hours of full-day meetings that it takes to decide what will make a good conference agenda. So putting an agenda together it's like selecting a team. You don't want to have 3 motions on the same topic, which you would be risking if there was a ballot. You don't want to have a load of motions that are, sadly, as we have ended up with this conference because we have to take constitutional amendments, a load of inward-facing navel-gazing. It's not about whether this is going to be more democratic. And if we did set the deadline for the early bird registrations, that would mean that most of the people that come to conference wouldn't get to vote on the ballot anyway. It's about making sure that although we are a filter, and I'm fully admitting that, we are a very broad-ranging filter with a huge range of views on the committee, and we try to make the conference as well-balanced and as good for you as it possibly can be. The other issue is that some debates take a huge amount of time. The nuclear debate that we have at this conference is set for 90 minutes. Some debates, like the one I chaired earlier on dentistry, are completely uncontentious. Everybody's in favour of it. We don't need to allocate them a huge amount of time. You can't do that with a ballot for motions because you can't know which ones are going to need more time. So I would say to you, please, although there are some very good points in this motion, it needs to be the start of a conversation, not the end of it. So please do not vote in favour of this motion, but as FCC, we will continue to listen to what the members want.
Thank you, Jenny. I'll ask Ben Rich to stand by. And is Alistair Carmichael from Orkney available?
Thank you, Conference. This is a bit of an unexpected pleasure. I obviously had a better time in the conference bar last night than I had realised. One very simple point. We ask an enormous amount of our members and activists who take on enormously valuable work in Federal Conference Committee, Policy Committee, Finance and Administration Committee, and all the rest of it. They do that because of their commitment to the party. And I think, having given these jobs, Conference is a party, we should trust them to get on and do it. And, you know, sometimes I don't like their decisions either, but you give somebody a job, you let them get on and do it, and you live with it, or else you get in there and you do it for yourself. So please, Conference, do not pass this motion.
Thank you, Alistair. Can I ask Gareth Epps to stand by, and I call Ben Rich from York.
Thanks very much for fitting me in. There's a bit of a curate's egg. The first half, it seems to me, is quite sensible. It's right to have some rules about why we take motions and why we don't. But the second half is offering a solution without a problem to solve, and that's why I ask you to vote against it. It proposes a vote on the assumption that there's a democratic deficit in the way that motions are currently selected. That's not so. FCC is democratically elected, as it's been said by others, by all of us and by all of our members. Its precise purpose is to create a coherent agenda, balancing topics, politically opportune, addressing the country's priorities and addressing the party's priorities. What's more, FCC has a very good democratic mandate. It's elected by all of us. This amendment would take power away from them and give it to what would inevitably be a narrower group of people who've registered for conference, not necessarily representative of anything. It's like, for example, the country elected a government to take decisions on, say, whether it was a good idea to be members of hypothetically a large international coalition. But rather than do what it thought and knew was right, it then outsourced it to a referendum. And look how that turned out. I know it's not the same. In this case, actually, it's even worse, because in that case, at least everybody got a vote in the referendum. In this case, it would probably be 1 to 25 of the number of people who vote for FCC. The amendment appears to be democratic, but it's not. And I'd have more sympathy with it if its movers had the courage of their convictions to say, well, let's abolish FCC and replace it with a direct democracy. But retaining the FCC and then giving a large amount of its power to someone else is just a mess. It creates work to no benefit, and it would almost certainly result in a less coherent agenda rather than a better one. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Will Catherine Pinder please stand by, and I call Gareth Epps from Whitney. Gareth is going to address lines 42 onwards.
Conference, isn't it good to be back? I'm really, really glad that this has been debated. I'm really, really grateful to Michael and Catherine for putting it on the agenda. It does shine a light on aspects of party business that are challenging, that are subject to all sorts of pressure, and gives rise, understandably, to feelings on the parts of some of those who put the hard work into drafting policy motions that it can be at times unfair. I was elected to Conference Committee on more than one occasion on a platform of selecting for debate motions which the leadership wouldn't like, but are nonetheless absolutely the right thing to debate, and standing up on more than one occasion to the leadership and their spads to ensure that we had conversations that the Tories wouldn't like. Now, our conference agenda here today is a bit flat. We have some good debates and discussions going on, but I'd like to see a little bit more of relevance to campaigning. And it's important in our conference to look to the outside and have debates where we have a succession of people lambasting the inadequacies of our privatised water system, putting sewage into the river, and so on. It may not be something that all of us find interesting, but it has a place. Just like taking the debates that address parts of our country that are not represented well among our membership. So like Oliver, I think the reasons section that's in this motion is okay. And like, as Jenny's just said, I think this needs to be the start of a conversation. The problem with ballots is, for one thing, they would always assume that everyone would read all the motions line by line. Heaven forfend that people might vote without having read all the detail. Also, our membership needs to be representative of the country as a whole and our strategic priorities. And there's also this thing that friends in Scotland might consider at the moment to be the Kate Forbes view of life. Because as it's drafted, I don't think there's anything to stop members coming in to join, register for a priorities ballot, and ensure debate of motions that sit very, very uncomfortably with our fundamental aims and values. I'd like Conference Committee to go and consider everything that's been said here. I think it's very, very useful, and potentially take on board the reasons for refusal. As Lucas said, there's merit in the principles behind this motion, and I hope at some stage we'll see a considered proposal come back that encapsulates some of the ideas here. But please vote against this motion today for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth. I call Catherine Pinder, who's going to submit on behalf of the movers of the motion. Catherine is from Copeland and Workington. And after Catherine's spoken, we will be moving to a vote.
Good morning, Conference. I think that the people who have voted against it are thinking primarily of FCC, the good work they do. They must be allowed to get on with their work. This motion, if passed, would not actually prevent FCC having the final word. We would ask them to get the ballot moved, and then the ones that are most successful in the ballot would go ahead. but it is up to FCC to decide how many can be taken, when they can be taken, and so would still have the final say. And the reasons Michael has given for allowing this to go ahead are very coherent. There are many reasons for rejecting motions in the first place, and they are considered before we suggest the ballot. Let me look at specific points that were made. Our first speaker objected to wading through all 45 motions. Well, friends, this is what FCC is for, and this is divided among them, and everyone is already considered. But what we are asking is that the final say should be the democratic right of our members. And those of us who have submitted many motions over the years will know how frustrating it is that some unknown person has rejected it, someone from the FCC has rejected it without giving it proper consideration. I'm asking you, colleagues, to think, can our own members decide what we're going to debate? There's plenty of room for FCC motions, but let there be a chance for ordinary members who year after year put in a motion and then find it rejected, give them a chance to ask everyone who's coming to conference to have a vote. There really is no reason why this should not happen. This can be arranged, the time can be found, and there's no reason why, as a thoroughly democratic organization, we cannot give more power to the members to decide this. Thank you. I don't think there's a question of needing a revised motion. It's not, it's really, there is no reason why this should not go ahead, because it is practicable and it is democratic. One person spoke in favor, I agree. This can be done a few days before conference, and then this will be, when the ballot result is known, then FCC decides how much time there can be, and time for amendments as well. And so, I don't like the idea that because FCC is elected and has more power, that it has to be for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. Can I just say that the balance of the debate reflected the balance of the cards that we received, and we are now moving to a vote. Can I ask everyone in favour of this motion to please show? And the people online will be voting now. And those against? Just wait for the online votes, but as I said earlier, this does require a 2/3 majority to be passed. Okay, that motion has been defeated. We're now moving on to F8. I'd like to thank my aides, Alison and Shafiq, the aide in the hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Conference. If people would like to take their seats, we'll start in just a minute. Okay, thank you very much, Conference. We are now moving on to item F8, the motion on the British nuclear deterrent. If people could take their seats and stop talking, we would like to start this debate as soon as possible. To understand what's going on, you will need a copy of the conference agenda, where you'll see the copy of the motion, the text of the motion on pages 80 to 83. On Conference Daily, pages 9 to 10, you will see a short drafting amendment that the movers of the motion have accepted, and also the text of Amendment 1, and the main debate we're going to have is between Amendment 1 and the main motion. I've also had notice of a reference back, which we will deal with later. I've had a request for a separate vote. This was submitted well after the deadline for separate votes, so I'm not going to be taking that. We have a couple of changes to the announced speakers. The summation for Amendment 1 will be Keith Melton, and the summation for the main motion will be Julie Smith. We also included notice of an intervention session for short 1-minute intervention speeches from the intervention mic. In fact, as of the beginning of the debate, we only had 2 cards in for that. So we are taking that session out, and we are considering those 2 cards along with other speakers' cards. I've had more than double the number of cards I possibly have time to call, so I would ask all speakers to stick very strictly to time, and we'll get in as many as possible. So thank you very much, Conference. We're now starting the debate. Would Keith Melton stand by to move Amendment 1? And I now call to move the main motion Richard Ford, MP for Tiverton and Honiton, and the party spokesperson for Defence.
Thank you very much, Conference, to those of you in the hall, to those of you at home. Thank you for putting me here at the Tiverton and Honiton by-election last June. It's fantastic to be able now to challenge the Conservative government in the House of Commons on matters as grave and as serious as this one today. And I'm going to be setting out in the next 6 minutes why the Conservative Party's approach on nuclear weapons is wrong, why the amendment is well-intentioned but flawed, particularly in relation to the situation that we see in Ukraine, and why Liberal Democrat policy needs to change. I'll be setting out a vision for a distinctive policy for our party on nuclear weapons. This is an area of policy I've had a very long-standing interest in, both in terms of when I served in the armed forces myself for over a decade, and also while working in universities for the last 10 years or so. I think we need to say straight up that the UK did make some progress in the 1990s on multilateral nuclear disarmament. We got rid of our tactical nuclear weapons, but we did so in a way that brought others down the nuclear ladder with us. But what we see from the Conservative government now is policy that breaches international law. International law is fundamental to our party. The Non-Proliferation Treaty has been blown apart by the Conservative Party's decision to increase the number of warheads available to the Royal Navy operationally, and to increase the circumstances in which it could afford itself the chance to use nuclear weapons. It would breach international law. The Conservative Party cannot be trusted, Conference, to speak softly and carry a big stick. I'd like to talk now a little bit about the amendment and also the proposal for a reference back. The proposal to refer this back to the Federal Policy Committee, back to the International Security Working Group, is not one that I or they would wish to accept. The International Security Working Group is doing some brilliant work on security in the broadest sense, in terms of international development. We will see in autumn the great work that's been going on in that working group. But the problem with bringing nuclear weapons to that debate is it will completely overshadow the things that we should be talking about in autumn. Conference, we need to deal with the nuclear weapons policy today. The unilateralist amendment, to be clear, is not a multilateralist amendment because it would bring no other nuclear weapon states down the nuclear ladder with us. The UK would be giving up our nuclear weapons while taking away our ability to negotiate our bargaining chip at the diplomatic table. The amendment's proposal to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons sounds, on the face of it, quite an attractive one. But let's think about who else is signing this treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. Canada, Germany, Denmark, the Netherlands. No, none of them are signing this treaty because they all recognise that while we have such a very dangerous country as Russia as our near neighbour, we cannot afford to sign that treaty. I agree with those proposing to amend this motion that we need strong conventional defences, and that's why I, as recently as last Monday, was challenging the Secretary of State for Defence on his planned cuts of 10,000 personnel to the Army. I served in the Army. I wouldn't ever tolerate cuts of 10,000 to the Army, but this is not an either-or choice. And most importantly, the situation in Ukraine is why we have to pass the motion today. Ukraine was itself a nuclear weapon state until the mid-1990s. It had 1,900 warheads and agreed in negotiation with Russia, with the US and with the UK to give up those nuclear weapons unilaterally. When I became our party's spokesperson for defence last September, one of the first things I did was to travel to Kyiv to find out about the situation for myself. I travelled to Bucha, to Irpin, to Hostomel, to see slide after slide after slide of disfigured, dismembered, burned, charred bodies. And I defy any one of you to take the trip that I took last September and then to decide that we should be giving up our nuclear weapons unilaterally in the way that Ukraine did. And I've stayed in touch with some of the Ukrainian MPs from our sister party, and one of them said to me on a call recently, "You've got it wrong, Richard. You cannot look at Putin and think that you are negotiating with somebody who is like you. You cannot look at Putin and say that you are looking in the mirror at somebody with benign intentions like the UK." So what of a Liberal Democrat vision for nuclear weapons policy? How do we respond to Putin's threats of the use of nuclear weapons? I suggest that the wrong way to respond to those threats would be to give up our nuclear weapons immediately. Instead, what we need to do is we need to embrace medium readiness when the international situation allows. In 2013, I stood on this platform and I advocated for a policy of medium readiness, that is, not having a nuclear-armed submarine at sea all the time. But the international situation has changed, and we need to change our policy to one of continuous at-sea deterrence in line with that. The Liberal Democrats can still be the most committed UK party to nuclear weapons constraint, and we will achieve this by adopting a policy of no first use. And we should embrace diplomacy. We should embrace talking to other nuclear weapon states about how we can, when the international situation affords, step down the nuclear ladder in concert with others. So to summarise, the choices are Conservative Party proliferation, an amendment that is essentially isolationist and unilateralist, or the motion unamended, which I urge you to vote for, a motion for multilateralists. Over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much, Richard. Would Claire Muir from the Cotswolds please stand by? I now call to move amendment number 1, Keith Melton from Newark and Sherwood.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Conference. Just after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Bertrand Russell wrote as follows: "Mankind is faced with a clear-cut alternative. Either we shall all perish, or we shall have to acquire some slight degree of common sense." My position with this amendment this morning is that we need a degree of uncommon sense, liberal sense, to change the world. Since the United Nations Treaty for the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons came into force in 2021, it is a matter of fact that nuclear weapons are now illegal under international law. And as Richard just said, that is a fundamental issue for Liberal Democrats. The 100% kill zone of a modest 1 megaton bomb is said to be at least 6 kilometres, just at over 3.7 miles. I was 15 in 1962, the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis. My home, my school and our family business were all within 3.7 miles of Waddington RAF Station, home of the Vulcan bombers, which carried the British weapons of mass destruction. Is it any wonder that I don't like nuclear weapons? I have to say that luck has played a part in our survival this far. Vasily Arkhipov, commodore of a flotilla of 4 Soviet submarines, was one of 3 key holders for the nuclear weapons on the submarine B-59, heading for Cuba. Out of touch with Moscow and surrounded by US ships, the sub's captain and the other key holder were going to activate their missiles. Arkhipov refused to use his key and saved the world from Armageddon. But we have relied on luck for far too long. I believe as a liberal that nuclear weapons are immoral, inhuman and illiberal, and I have always said so. The Prime Minister of Fiji, speaking last year at the first meeting of the states parties of the UN Treaty, pointed out that on a planet still suffering from rampant zoonotic pandemic, a global food crisis and runaway climate crisis, nuclear weapons do not feed us, do not clothe us, nor do they keep out the rising sea. He also pointed out that the amount spent each year to maintain nuclear weapons around the world was put at about $100 million, not dissimilar from the $100 billion needed to support developing nations to mitigate climate change. I take issue with Richard on the characterisation of this motion as unilateralist. It is not. It is absolutely not. A research briefing in the House of Commons Library declares the treaty to be the first multilateral, legally binding instrument for nuclear disarmament to have been negotiated in 20 years. We must change the narrative on nuclear weapons in the UK. So what we're debating today is about our aspiration for the future as liberals. It's about what we believe should happen next. It is about our chosen direction of travel. Unfortunately, the motion in front of you today seems rather to be based on the notion of not frightening off Tory voters. However, if you need proof that objecting to nuclear weapons would not disqualify you from power, you only need to look north of the border. The SNP position on nuclear weapons is that they are immoral, ineffective and expensive, and yet Nicola Sturgeon has been First Minister in Scotland for over 8 years. Let's be clear, this amendment represents a sensible, responsible and multilateral approach to an issue vital for our survival as species on Earth. I commend to you the whole of this amendment, complex though it may seem at a glance, as a simple statement that we wish to see an end to the terrible weapons.
Please draw your remarks to a close.
That threaten the age of extinction and the probable most extinction of the human species. I commend the amendment to you.
Thank you very much, Keith. Would Alan Reid from East Dunbartonshire please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Claire Muir from the Cotswolds.
Hello, conference. This is my first in-person conference, and this is the first time I've spoken in a debate. I joined the party in 2021, and I very much feel I'm in at the deep end at the moment. But I felt compelled to come and speak because this motion gets to the heart of why I joined the party in 2021. I'm a retired Royal Air Force Group Captain, and when I left the Armed Forces, I was searching for a party that had credible, evidence-based policies, which acted in the national interest, and which had the courage to change those policies when the facts change. As Keynes said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? During my 23 years in the Air Force, we were journeying towards a nuclear order managed through arms control, signalling and actions intended to create a stable context in which the role of nuclear weapons would be minimised. This isn't just theoretical for me. In 2010, sat heavily pregnant with twins, I was sat around the negotiating table, persuading my military counterparts from another nation, dissuading them from embarking on a nuclear weapons program. In this context, our 2017 policy on nuclear weapons was of its time. It reflected that trajectory. Had we remained on that delicate diplomatic path, nuclear weapons would purposely be fading into the background. But we need to see it as it is. Nuclear weapons are back. Putin's threats have returned deterrence theory to the centre stage. And deterrence is much more complicated now than it used to be. This motion recognises that that is the case. But, and this is an important but, this motion equally maintains a clear-eyed vision on the desired strategic end state. We must be frank, it's hard to envisage Russia and China joining us around the negotiating table anytime soon. But that doesn't make treaties irrelevant. A return to that path has to remain a goal, even if the current context is desperately challenging. This motion provides that goal. This policy may be really uncomfortable to discuss. However, as a party, we need to demonstrate that we're up to the task and up to the debate. We need to be questioning the government about nuclear strategy, nuclear procurement, programmes, plans, and the integrated review. This policy motion will give us the mandate to do that with confidence and credibility. The current context may mean that some will feel that their support for nuclear weapons has been proven. Other members will remain opposed to nuclear weapons under all circumstances. This motion does not dismiss or negate either of these two passionately held positions. It acknowledges short-term realism while retaining a long-term vision, a vision that surely should be everybody's goal. We're now walking on a less certain path. We must tread carefully. Nuclear weapons are significantly increasing in importance, and while we may passionately wish that this were not the case, we have to face the world as it is and not the world as we wish it to be. So, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do? I've always been impressed by the ability of the Lib Dems to do this with confidence. I urge you to examine these facts and support the motion accordingly.
Thank you very much, Claire. Would Leon Duveen from Bassett Law please stand by? I now call to speak against Amendment 1, Alan Reid from East Dunbartonshire.
Conference. I'm here to speak against the unilateralist amendment. With a nuclear weapons state waging a savage war in Europe for over a year with no end in sight, now is not the time to unilaterally announce that we are giving up our nuclear weapons. It's obvious that Putin chose to attack Ukraine because it's not a member of NATO. Putin has made it clear that he wants to take over all the countries that were once in the Soviet Union or the Russian Empire. But he knows the consequences of attacking a NATO country, so he picked on Ukraine. Sweden and Finland realized this as well, and when Putin invaded Ukraine, both countries rushed to get their application in the post to join NATO. Yes, nuclear weapons are terrible inventions, and we should be doing all that we can to rid the world of them. But the way to do that is as is laid out in the motion. The government should make global disarmament a diplomatic priority for the Foreign Office and should engage with other states on disarmament initiatives. But a unilateral announcement by the UK that we're destroying our nuclear weapons won't persuade any single other country to destroy any of theirs. The harsh realities is that nuclear weapons exist, and the only reason Putin hasn't used them or invaded a NATO country is that NATO has powerful weapons to defend its members, and these include nuclear weapons as a last resort. Anyone thinking of supporting the amendment should reflect on the consequences for our membership of NATO. It would be sheer hypocrisy to destroy our nuclear weapons and still expect to deter aggressors by being under the umbrella of the American and French nuclear deterrents. It would be hypocritical in the extreme to give up nuclear weapons and remain members of NATO, a nuclear weapons alliance. That's SNP policy, and I don't expect Liberal Democrats to copy this hypocrisy. Conference, with the backdrop of the barbaric invasion of Ukraine, now is entirely the wrong time to disarm unilaterally. Such action would not be copied by any other state and would send exactly the wrong signal to aggressive regimes. The motion adopts the right balance of a minimum deterrent and disarmament initiatives. Please pass it unamended.
Thank you, Alan. Would Martin Hallwood from Cheltenham please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of Amendment 1, Leon Duveen from Bassett Law.
Good morning, Conference. And I'll also give you my military credentials. I have been a soldier in the Israeli Defence Forces, in the infantry and the artillery, as an officer, as an ordinary soldier and not an officer. But here we are again, discussing nuclear weapons, and the spending of billions we don't have, and which are also far better uses for, to replace our out-of-date Trident missiles and our out-of-date submarines used not to launch them. Let's not delude ourselves. The UK's few nuclear weapons will not deter a dictator who doesn't care about his own citizens, who could obliterate much of the UK before we could even launch our own missiles. It also wouldn't deter terrorists who could attack in the UK with a dirty bomb, because where would we fire the missiles at? They wouldn't deter a conventional weapons attack on us either, because we have a no-first strike policy for our nuclear weapons. The only reason for keeping nuclear weapons would be to use them as part of a mutual disarmament programme with the USSR and Russia, and now there are no such programmes. And indeed, it's very unlikely there will be any such programmes in the foreseeable future. So that case is gone as well. So unless you have nuclear arsenals on the scale of Russia, China, or the USA, there is no point in having any. Our potential enemies won't be scared of the few weapons we do have, and keeping them runs the risk of a miscalculation leading to launching them in an error, triggering a nuclear holocaust. Meanwhile, our conventional forces have been hollowed out. We have too few soldiers, too few ships, and too few planes. Spending money here would make a real deterrent to potential enemies. It would allow us to have enough manpower to deploy our forces in peacekeeping and humanitarian operations around the globe. It would allow us to provide work here in the UK, building the ships, building the planes, and kitting out the forces. Conference, please have the courage to say no to new nuclear weapons and support Keith's excellent amendment, and if it isn't passed, against this motion. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much, Leon. Would Edward Lucas from Cities of London and Westminster please stand by? I now call to speak against Amendment 1, Martin Hallwood from Cheltenham.
Conference, I'm proud to be a member of a party with a strong instinct for peace. We have a long history of supporting multilateral nuclear disarmament, not as a cop-out, but because the safest path is for everyone to disarm together. As internationalists, we've always backed reciprocal arms reduction and non-proliferation treaties, including that binding obligation on all nuclear states by Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty to negotiate general nuclear disarmament. We did it in the European Parliament, and we've done it in Westminster. In coalition government, we insisted on the Trident Alternatives Review. We challenged upgrading the Trident fleet and increasing our nuclear stockpile. And in conference, we said we'd maintain our deterrent, but step down the nuclear ladder by ending continuous at-sea deployment, sending a powerful signal that we were serious about those reciprocal obligations. But today, the clearest signals of all are being sent in bombs and tanks and threats by Vladimir Putin. So our stepping down the nuclear ladder now would, I'm afraid, send a very different signal. But Amendment 1 would retain that policy and go further by asking us to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Now, for non-nuclear states, that's great. It reinforces non-proliferation. But let's be crystal clear, Conference, for one nuclear state, signing it alone, the treaty is a commitment to unilateral nuclear disarmament. Article 4 commits signatories to immediately remove their nuclear weapons from operational status and destroy them, to a deadline set by the treaty parties, not by negotiation with other nuclear states. It is not reciprocal. And then Amendment 1 goes even further, asking us to cancel Trident anyway without even consulting our allies in NATO or across Europe. Amendment 1 wouldn't even have us ask if this unilateral step would leave them feeling less safe, less protected, less certain of our response to Russian aggression. Ukraine in particular might say, we stepped down the nuclear ladder in 1994. We abandoned our nuclear arsenal. It hasn't made us safer. But neither will the UK abandoning yours. I worry that Amendment 1 won't land well in Tunbridge Wells or Tiverton. I'm far more worried that it won't land well in Kyiv or Paris or Riga. Conference, we got it right in government before. We supported non-proliferation. We resisted escalation. We sought ways to de-escalate when the time was right. When we are in government again, we will do the right thing again. But we won't do it alone. We won't do it when it would send the wrong signal to our friends as well as our enemies. And we won't do it when it would actually make the world less safe. Do please reject Amendment 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. Would Josh Babarindi from Eastbourne please stand by? And now call to speak against Amendment 1, Edward Lucas from Cities of London and Westminster.
I'm here to apologise. It's 40 years too late, but it's better late than never. I used to be on the executive of the then National League of Young Liberals and ULS, the Liberal Students. We saw ourselves as the zealous guardians of the party's conscience. I'm really glad that hasn't changed. I took every opportunity to use the nuclear issue to annoy the leadership, and in particular, to sow division in our alliance with the SDP. What did I do? I pushed a motion through Party Council backing the Greenham Common Peace Camp. I stole conference headlines by publicly demanding the resignation of our then Defence Minister, Chris Mayhew, because he didn't agree with another policy that I pushed through, which was for the unilateral abandonment of the cruise and Pershing missiles. That was wrong. Multilateralism worked. Under the INF Treaty, we gave up cruise and Pershing, and the Soviet Union gave up its nuclear intermediate-range missiles as well. Unilateralism doesn't work. Just ask the Ukrainians. We also know now that the peace movement in the West was funded directly by the KGB. So that the voters understood it better than we did, and it cost us votes. We came so close in 1983, just 2 percentage points behind Labour. And I worry to this day that the perception of impracticality and division cost us crucial votes. Now, I wrote to Chris Mayhew when I was living behind the Iron Curtain in 1987, and I apologised. I said, you were right, and I was wrong. So I'm here to say sorry to conference now. Let's not make the same mistake again.
Thank you, Edward. Would Scott Emery from Haringey please stand by? And now call to speak in favour of the motion, Josh Babarindi from Eastbourne.
Good morning, Conference. This is the first time that I have spoken in a debate in person at Liberal Democrat Conference, and I am delighted to do so. Now, as many of you know, I'm an Eastbourne lad who loves his town, but I'm proud of my country and protective of democracy internationally, which is more fragile now than it has been in any of my 29 years. And a key aspiration of mine, of that protection, is to see, or more than that, to achieve a future free of nuclear weapons. And I know that we're all on the same page when it comes to that vision. And so the question is not about whether to advance our disarmament. The question is about when and about how. Now, disarmament in good faith is a rational approach at a time when we can trust that our nuclear interlocutors are likely to reciprocate in good faith. In fact, the 1968 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty uses that exact term, good faith, to describe a condition in which this should take place. Disarmament in good faith is a rational approach when we can trust that our nuclear opponents are willing to become collaborators, co-founders in a joint venture of peace. But against all of my instincts that genuinely look for the best in people and for the best in institutions, I'm gutted to say that I do not have trust in the likes of Russia's good faith approach at this time. And those instincts are more than just a gut feeling. They're based on gross provocations by the Russian regime, matters of fact. Look at them suspending their involvement in the New START treaty. Look at their essential downing of a US drone over the Black Sea just a matter of days ago. Look at the appalling atrocities that they are committing in Ukraine. The trust is broken. And so for that reason, I think that diluting our continuous at-sea deterrent would come at significant risk. It would send the wrong message to Putin. It would also send the wrong message to Ukraine and those shedding blood in pursuit of democracy. But it's also my view that we must act with restraint. We must send a strong message that nuclear brinkmanship is not sustainable and that we are prepared to show leadership in our pursuit of a nuclear-free world. And I think that this motion strikes that balance by pushing for a minimum credible deterrent, but committing never to be the ones who are the first to push that red button. We are stressing our defensive rather than aggressive inclinations. And by pushing for a global disarmament plan from line 57 onwards, we make clear our holistic ambition to achieve a nuclear-free world. So I hope that you will join me in backing this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Josh. Would Helen Maguire from Epsom and Newell please stand by? And now call to speak in favour of Amendment 1, Scott Emery from Haringey.
Good morning, Conference. I am disappointed to see this policy come forward. This is a step away from multilateralism. I did not agree with our current policy, but at least it took direct action to reduce our nuclear weapons. This policy changes that, instead saying we'll examine the option in the future. I understand the fears. Russia's awful actions in Ukraine have caused untold damage. The threat is higher, and that pushes people towards a reaction. But a reaction towards what? Do we think that Putin will be put off because there is one less country with the ability to react? I think not. Either he is smart and he sees it as impossible to win a nuclear war, so he'll avoid it, or he's mad. And I think we know what that leads to. This is what nuclear war has led us to. Dangerous, dangerous times. I'm afraid that throughout this current situation with Russia, it will not be unique. There will be another country in the future with nuclear weapons. Many are already exploring the possibility. And one will go rogue. If we are lucky enough to get through the time of Putin, do we really want this with the next dictator? To avoid this situation again in 20, 50, 100 years, we need to take steps now to reduce the amount of nuclear weapons in the world. This is similar to the leave it in the ground policy. The only stocks we can directly control are our own. We can push others, but at the end of the day, they'll do what they want. So, Conference, we have to ask ourselves the questions. If we want other countries to move away from nuclear weapons, we have to show the way. If we want to stop countries building nuclear weapons in the first place, then we must not have them as a status symbol. If we want to create a world free from nuclear weapons, as this document states, we can go ahead and do it. Conference, please be bold, back the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. Would Nick Harvey from North Devon please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Helen Maguire from Epsom Manuel.
Good morning, Conference. I'm Helen Maguire, PPC for Epsom Manuel and hopefully the next MP. To provide some background, I'm a retired captain from the British Army, the Royal Military Police, and served in Bosnia and Iraq. Like many Lib Dems, I've always and still fully support the move to nuclear disarmament. As a long-term aim, this is exactly what we should be aiming for, so that one day we can have a nuclear armament-free world. But this and the nuclear deterrent is a really complex problem. Now, in the Army, we used a planning tool called the Combat Estimate to help us plan. So seeing as we're talking about the military, I thought we'd use this to assess the Lib Dem policy on nuclear deterrent. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to go through all 7 questions, but I thought questions 1 to 4 might help us. The first question is, what's the situation? Well, when we last considered the situation, the world was in a very different place. There was war, but there hadn't been the veiled threat of using a nuclear deterrent. And there hadn't been the potential of using nuclear weapons and the potential of a World War III. We've now entered an age when a nation, Russia, believes that it's okay to invade another country, completely defying the rule of international law. And it's not just Russia. In this volatile age, there are other countries whose intentions we don't yet fully understand, China. The second question, mission analysis. What is our UK nuclear mission? Well, it's to protect the UK, and the continuous at-sea deterrent provides a 24-hour-7, 365 days a year effective defence mechanism for the UK. The third question is, what effects do I want to have on the enemy? Well, we want to deter any country, group, terrorist organisation from ever considering invading or attacking the UK. And this sends a really powerful message to those who would do us harm. Don't you dare try. The fourth question is, how can I best accomplish this? Now, if we continued on the course of medium responsiveness with no continuous deployment, this wouldn't achieve our mission. So let's remember what our mission is, to protect the United Kingdom. It wouldn't provide the daily protection for the UK. It would leave us exposed to some very real threats. If we consider how the situation has changed, it would weaken our credibility amongst our allies as well. So I, like many individuals in the room today, have been on the ground in war zones, and it is not something I would want individuals to ever have to experience. The continuous at-sea deterrent is there to protect us, and we need it now more than ever before. Nuclear use should always be an absolute last resort. We should never be the first ones to act. But today, I ask you, please, Conference, to back this motion to protect the UK, our citizens and our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. After the next speaker, we'll deal with the reference back. But now to speak in favour of the motion, I call Nick Harvey from North Devon.
Conference, when Margaret Thatcher committed Britain to the Trident deterrent back in 1981, it represented quite a small proportion of quite large defence. We had an army of 160,000 soldiers and a navy of 66 warships. But when Gordon Brown and ultimately David Cameron, almost 40 years later, committed us to like-for-like replacement, it represented really a large portion of scarily small defence, barely able to cover our security obligations in the land, sea and air domains, let alone space, cyber and counter-terrorism. So Liberal Democrats argued that we should have something smaller, something more minimalist, that would use up less of the defence budget. In government, as Martin Horwood pointed out, we initiated a formal review of alternatives, which concluded that there were viable and smaller alternatives. But predictably, as soon as we'd gone, the Tories ploughed full steam ahead with like-for-like replacement, and we are now committed as a country to building a replacement fleet of submarines. Indeed, we're already in the process of doing so. So we then turned our attention, if we couldn't have an alternative system, to an alternative posture. And we argued that there should be a flexible nuclear posture, that we should take steps down the ladder, but retain the ability to step back up if the security situation should diminish in the future. Roll forward now to the situation where one of the world's nuclear superstates has descended into the ranks of rogue state, invading the only country that has ever got rid of its nuclear weapons and threatening the use of nuclear weapons in that context. Now, we're going to have an argument that there should be a reference back, and I'm quite sympathetic to the view that this is not the ideal moment to be having this debate. But there's absolutely no point referring it back to the committee to bring it up again in September. Nothing is going to have changed by then. These submarines will have a life service from now until 2070. We can come back at any point and debate Amendment 1. I dearly hope we will, and that the security system will allow us to. But now is not the point at which we can possibly be doing that. The signal it would send would be completely appalling. In the motion before us, we have a perfectly sensible way forward. Conference like the Irish Traveller, I would not have started from here. But here is where we are. And with a heavy heart but a clear head, I commend this motion to the conference.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you very much, Nick. Would Ruvi Ziegler from Oxford East please stand by? He'll be the next speaker if the reference back fails. But we're now going to deal with the reference back, which is submitted by David Grace from Cambridge. We've been meeting now for 3 hours, conference, so you're all now experts in procedural motions. So you don't really need me to explain how it's going to work, but I'll do so anyway. It's a two-stage procedure. In a moment, I will read out the reasons why, which David has submitted, why the motion should be referred back. And then I will ask you to vote, and people online should get ready to vote. You probably need to refresh your screen. I will ask you to vote on whether or not you want to hear a mini debate on the reference back. If you vote against that, we'll just return to the debate. If you vote in favour of the mini debate, we will have one speaker on each side, and we will then have a second vote on whether or not to refer the motion back. So, get your voting cards ready. People online, get ready to vote. This is the reasons which David has submitted for referring the motion back. I propose that this motion be referred back to the Federal Policy Committee's established working group on international security and defence, so that we can consider nuclear weapons in the overall context of defence. Voting for or against this motion would not achieve that. There is no justification for a separate motion today. This will also allow time to respond to the government's integrated review refresh just published. We need to take defence carefully and seriously. So, can I now see everyone who wants to hear a mini debate on that reference back? Thank you very much. And can I now see everyone who does not want to hear the mini debate? That is very clearly defeated. Thank you very much, conference. We now return to the debate as it was. So I'd like to ask Chris Adams from Newham, Barking and Dagenham to stand by. And now call to speak in favour of Amendment 1, Dr. Ruvi Ziegler from Oxford East.
Thanks very much, conference. So imagine the Convention Against Torture said that torture is wrong, but 5 countries in the world are allowed to torture people. Or let's take a slightly more concrete example from this week. Imagine we had a refugee convention that said all countries should take refugees, but 5 of them can decide whether at some point in future they may wish to, but at the moment it's not the right time. Well, frankly, ladies and gentlemen, this is what the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty says. It creates, and I say this as somebody who teaches international human rights law and find this incredibly perplexing in 2023, it literally sets 2 classes of states. States that are nuclear states and states that are non-nuclear states. And what this motion does, well-intentioned as it may be, is essentially maintain that inequality of arms around the world. Now, it's not a coincidence, those 5 states that are the states that are nuclear states also happen to be the 5 permanent Security Council members, right, who also have a veto on any other element of impunity in their lives. Now, yesterday, you may have missed it being at the rally and otherwise here, you may have noticed that there was an arrest warrant issued against Vladimir Putin by the International Criminal Court. Now, the reason that was possible was that unlike in the area of nuclear weapons, with the International Criminal Court, there was a bypass that was created to avoid the full impunity of the 5 nuclear member states that are the permanent member states of the Security Council, and that is if you commit a crime on the territory of a member state of the ICC. And that's why we now have an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, and his travel in the world has been, as of yesterday, severely restricted. With nuclear weapons, as a couple of speakers have said before me, we don't have an equivalent. With nuclear weapons, it is a question of countries taking the steps themselves, of those 5 countries that are the declared nuclear powers taking the steps. And let's just pause and analyze whether the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty has been successful. So countries that we know have nuclear weapons, like India, Pakistan, and Israel, have never signed it. Countries that we know probably has it, North Korea, has withdrawn from it. And so, has it been successful? Well, not particularly. Has it sent a bad message that the world is divided to countries that are allowed to hold destructive weapons and others that are not? Absolutely. Should the UK take us in the direction of trying, as little as it can be, to lead by example on this area as it should on many others? I say absolutely. So I call you unreservedly to support Amendment 1. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much, Ruvi. Would Tim Farron from Westmoreland and Lonsdale please stand by? And now called to speak against Amendment 1, Chris Adams from Newham, Barking and Dagenham.
Thank you very much, Duncan. I have the dubious privilege of being a citizen of 3 of the world's nuclear powers. I can explain why after the debate if anyone's particularly interested. But by training, I'm a historian, and so my instinct is always to look backwards in time. The reality is that humanity loves to war. The conflicts of the great powers throughout the early modern era and up until the Second World War destroyed huge swathes of society, and they continued pretty regularly. Now, sometimes we credit the formation of the European Union with keeping peace in Europe, and we argue that as a result of the agreement on coal and steel, that we were economically united, and that therefore that would prevent war because we were so interdependent. The reality is that, as Brexit has demonstrated, these kinds of treaties can fall apart. Countries can decide to leave them, and economic dependence never is something that prevents war. We have seen that in Ukraine. Russia doesn't care about the sanctions that we have been putting on them. They don't care about the disruption to the global wheat trade. They don't care about anything like that. They will take it on the chin because they believe that Ukraine is theirs. This debate, ultimately, is not about the principle of whether or not nuclear weapons are a good thing. We all agree nuclear weapons are awful. We all agree that they can cause catastrophic harm. All of us, I'm sure, look back to the only use of nuclear weapons in war at Hiroshima and Nagasaki with utter horror and a desire never, ever to see that happen again. But conference, let's have a look at what the situation was the last time that nuclear weapons were used in war. There was only one nuclear power, the United States of America. Now, the reality is that if Britain got rid of its nuclear weapons, and if we continued with the principle that we believe that there should be no nuclear weapons on the earth, and we convince our allies to get rid of their nuclear weapons, who would be left with nuclear weapons? Russia and China. Now, I don't think that Vladimir Putin, presented with the opportunity to use nuclear weapons and utterly obliterate the United Kingdom, with no recourse from our side to reply, would think twice, frankly, because I don't trust him. I don't think any of us trust him to make the reasonable decision. If we decided that we would simply get rid of our own nuclear weapons, and we've made clear that if signing up to the treaty we would do that, then we would be beholden to the United States of America for our defence. Now, frankly, Conference, I don't think I trust someone like Donald Trump to come to our defence. So I'm pretty uneasy with that as well. Since World War II, there have been no active conflicts between the world's great powers. The reason for this, ultimately, is that they hold the ability to obliterate the other one. It's unfortunate, but it's true. The reality is that this amendment is wrong when it says that nuclear weapons cannot prevent armed conflict. So I urge you to vote against the amendment and for the motion unamended. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Would Keith Melton stand by to summate on Amendment 1? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Tim Farron, MP for Westmoreland and Lonsdale.
Hello all. Look, it is no secret that Liz Truss and I have much in common. Thing one, we were both epic leaders. Two, we both made speeches to Liberal Democrat conference in the 1990s with which we no longer agree. Then I was a member of CND. I would have backed this amendment. Now I support the motion and oppose the amendment. Why? Because I believe in actual disarmament. I want peace and not platitudes. This amendment does commit us to getting rid of our nuclear weapons, but it does nothing to remove a single warhead from those of the arsenals of Russia, China, the US, or the rest. Nobody seriously thinks that that makes the world one bit safer. Why wouldn't we use the weapons that we have as bargaining chips to reduce and remove everybody else's weapons? We will not have protection against the terrible threat of nuclear Armageddon until every weapon of every country is decommissioned, and that is what I am committed to. This amendment leaves the doomsday clock just as close to midnight, but it removes our ability to influence that ticking clock. It robs us of our place at the top table. It likely sees us leave the big five permanent members of the UN Security Council. And it might be hard for us to hear this, but our party has been proven heartbreakingly right when we said that leaving the European Union would diminish Britain's influence and relevance in the world. So why today would we choose? Why would we choose impotence when it comes to being at the one table where peace and disarmament could actually be achieved? Some will mention the cost of our nuclear deterrent. Two things to say about the financial cost. First, we are so far down the line with the Trident programme that it will cost us more to cancel it than to keep it. And secondly, look, I am sure that over the last 29 years, Ukraine will have made a financial saving as a result of giving up its nuclear deterrent, and I am convinced that those savings were obliterated on day one of Putin's illegal invasion. And who seriously believes that the coward Putin would have invaded a Ukraine that had retained its nuclear deterrent? The British people want peace and they want security, and they have a habit of turning their backs on parties that seem to have lost the plot when it comes to peace and security. The question we must face today is this: is disarmament a thing we want to talk about, or is it a thing we want to achieve? How dare we leave our friends and allies in NATO, in Poland, Lithuania, in Estonia, under even greater threat than they are now, just because we want to feel a little bit better about ourselves? I am desperate for peace, not posturing, so please reject the amendment and back the motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Thank you very much, Tim. We are now moving to the summation speeches on the amendment and the motion. So would Julie Smith from Cambridge please stand by? I now call to summate on behalf of Amendment 1, Keith Melton from Newark and Sherwood.
I apologise first of all that I am not Baroness Sue Miller, who was going to come to speak to summate on the motion, on the amendment. And I reject my good friend Tim Farron saying I'm posturing, because I'm not posturing. I want this party to choose a direction of travel. We are not talking about a unilateralist treaty. You have been misled. The people who have said that to you are wrong. There was a meeting, the first meeting of the states parties was held last year. If you want to look it up online, it's very interesting to listen to. And they came up with this decision, that the destruction of nuclear weapons should be done within 10 years, and they even gave a beyond that 5-year plus. Just because we would sign the treaty does not mean that we would immediately dismantle Trident and so on. I hope we would, because I hope Putin might well have been gone by the time we signed the treaty. So do not look on this as giving up all the deterrence factor. Now, let me talk about deterrence very briefly. Deterrence works in the other direction as well. And the reasons we didn't go in to help Ukraine when when Crimea was invaded, was because we were afraid of the nuclear threat from Putin, because we recognized that he's bonkers. And we didn't help on the ground with soldiers and sea defense and so on because we were afraid of nuclear. Now, the other thing I just wanted to say in summary is that the movers of the motion have accepted part of our resolution, which said that we should not reduce the army and that we should review all of our armed forces and so on. They have cherry-picked that. But the only reason that was in there was because we cannot do that whilst we are still paying the huge cost for Trident, as Leon said. And I think the thing that you have to do is to bear in mind that what you are voting for is a direction of travel, not that you are giving up the big stick now. In a Mexican standoff, when everybody is pointing guns at everybody else, the solution to that the solution to peace in that situation is for at least one person to put that weapon down so that you can start talking the other people who have the weapons to put their weapons down as well. Support this amendment as a direction of travel and do not be overswayed by the supposed deadline. We have got at least 10, perhaps 15 years of negotiation, which makes this a multilateral amendment. Please bear that in mind. To characterize it as unilateralist is wrong. Support the amendment, please.
Thank you very much, Keith. After the next speech, we're moving to the votes, so get your voting cards ready. I now call to summate on the main motion, Baroness Julie Smith from Cambridge, the party's defence spokesperson in the House of Lords.
Good afternoon, conference. It's great to be back in York. I'm not sure it's quite so great to be debating nuclear weapons yet again, because there is a little bit of sense of déjà vu all over again. Like Tim Farron and Edward Lucas, I've been looking at the nuclear questions for 40 years. The slight difference is that I started off in the SDP and I was always a multilateralist. Firstly, I would like to apologise that I am speaking rather than Layla. Layla is sitting in the front row and she's been whispering things to me, but she's lost her voice and therefore didn't want to croak the messages to say, support this motion unamended. So I'm here to do that job. But fellow Liberal Democrats, I believe many of the points the speakers have made all the points that I would want to make, and they have made them incredibly powerfully. Today, I feel it is such a privilege to be a Liberal Democrat, to have so many passionate speakers, well-informed speakers on both sides of the debate. All of us want a world without nuclear weapons. None of us think that nuclear weapons are something moral that we want to have. The question is how we get to the destination of a world without nuclear weapons. And part of that relates to the context in which we are living. In 2010, Shirley Williams gave the Tim Garden Memorial Lecture. It was the time of the Trident Alternatives Review, and she said at that time, nuclear weapons are very expensive, and seeking a role and purpose in the post-Cold War world. She raised concerns over the UN Security Council and the P5, rather as Ruvi Ziegler did today, and that is absolutely something that we should be looking to amend. But at the time, Shirley made the point that we heard today. Nuclear weapons might not work against terrorists. You wouldn't use them against North Korea for fear of reprisals. But she then went on to suggest that actually there was nobody else, really. All the other nuclear powers were either our partners or allies. That was 2010. What a difference a decade makes. As we heard from Claire Muir in her fantastic maiden speech to conference, like Keynes, if the facts change, we might want to change our minds. Nobody now could think that Vladimir Putin is a partner or ally, but clearly a threat to the United Kingdom potentially, but certainly to our NATO partners and allies. To disarm unilaterally, as the amendment is proposing, it might be a multilateralist treaty, but the disarmament would be unilateralist. If we did that, we would persuade no one. No other country would give up nuclear weapons on the back of that. The motion gives the opportunity of taking a step back, of holding the government to account, telling the government to reduce its nuclear warheads. It says what we believe. We are committed to the international rule of law and disarmament in that route. But walking away from nuclear weapons now, giving up our NATO commitments, would raise all sorts of questions. As Alan Reid pointed out, we don't want the hypocrisy of the SNP policy. And as Tim Farron pointed out, if we step back now and just said we're not having Trident renewal, we won't save a penny because the costs have already been committed. So, fellow Liberal Democrats, support the motion unamended and help keep the United Kingdom safe and secure.
Thank you very much, Julie. Thank you, Julie. We're now moving to a series of 2 votes. So people online, get ready to vote, and people in the hall, can you get your voting cards ready? The first vote will be on Amendment 1, for and against, and then we'll vote on the main motion as amended or not, as the case may be, for and against. So the first vote is on Amendment 1. Can I see all those voting in favour of Amendment 1? Thank you very much. Can I see all those voting against Amendment 1? Thank you very much. That is very clearly defeated. Now we move to a vote on the main motion as unamended. Can I see all those voting in favour of the main motion? Thank you very much. And can I see all those voting against the main motion? Sorry, we just have to wait for the online voting to conclude. You can put your hands down now. I think we know how people voted in the hall. While we're waiting, I'll just say thank you to my aides for this debate, Nick DaCosta and Hannah Kitching. You could tell Conference Committee think this is an important debate if they give me, as aide, the chair of Conference Committee. Yeah, it's the same way. The motion is very clearly carried. Thank you very much indeed, Conference. Thank you to all the speakers. I think that was an excellent debate. Apologies to those I couldn't call. And now hand over to Paul McGarry for the next item.
It is wonderful. Hello. It is wonderful to see so much Lib Deming. If you can take your seats. Take your seats. Good morning, conference. Yesterday, Ed told us we must beat the Tories. Our keynote speaker is someone who knows all about beating Tories. Before Richard Ford, Helen Morgan, and Sarah Green, there was Sarah Olney, who not only beat the Tories twice, she beat SAC into surrender. Conference, I welcome our spokesperson for Treasury, Business and Industrial Strategy, Sarah Olney, MP.
Thank you very much, Conference. It's such a pleasure to be here after 3.5 years, and I think this is the first time since the general election in 2019, so it really is a genuine pleasure to be here at this time. And it's such a privilege to have been asked by Ed Davey to lead for the party on Treasury and business matters, and especially at a time when I think the economy is uppermost in people's minds. Interest rates, inflation, commodity prices, wage rates, fuel costs, they're part of our everyday conversation now in a way that they haven't been since the 1970s. We even all became experts on bond yields for a week last autumn, and tracking the exchange rate against the dollar was briefly a national pastime. Liz Truss's lasting and only gift to this nation is that we all now know what a liability-driven investment is. But I'm afraid that this elevated interest in the economy means that people are worried. They're worried about paying the bills. They're worried about the cost and availability of food in the shops and about the value of their income against the rising cost of living. And how could they not be worried? In the last 12 months, inflation has reached levels I've not seen in my lifetime. Interest rates have gone up to 4%, having been below 1% for nearly 15 years. And even with the energy price guarantee, energy bills have doubled. Not only has this government failed to get a grip on the cost of living crisis, they're hitting hard-working families with unfair tax rises, whilst at the same time leaving our schools and hospitals stretched to breaking point. Friends, we come together again after an unprecedented period of national turbulence. Brexit, the pandemic, Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine have all tested our national resources in different ways. It's time to reflect on the lessons we've learned about the strengths and weaknesses of our national economy so that we can set the right path for the future. There is one measure in which the UK tops the European rankings under the Conservatives, and that is income inequality. Under their policies, there are greater disparities in income between the richest and poorest in the UK than almost anywhere else in Europe. And the lowest income households in the UK are more than 20% poorer than their counterparts in France and Germany. That is the true cost of the cost of living crisis under the Conservatives. The Liberal Democrats are the party of equality, opportunity and inclusion. We understand that if we want to improve Britain's prospects, we have to start with those on the lowest incomes. If there's one thing that all parts of the political spectrum can agree on, it's that the UK needs to grow its economy. Under the Conservatives, so much of the UK's potential is going untapped. Anemic growth, weaker investments, falling living standards. Britain deserves so much better. Economic growth will not just deliver prosperity for individuals, it will also raise the funds we need to invest in our public services. But to be effective and sustainable, growth must also combat inequality. We need to bring into our economy the people who've been excluded by this government, and we must remove the barriers preventing them from succeeding. And I see so much ambition and opportunity all across the UK. All that is lacking is the right political leadership to address it. Under the Conservatives, our economy is being held back by a lack of people and skills. I cannot think of a sector or business group or public service that I have spoken to in the last 18 months that hasn't told me about its difficulties in attracting workers. The NHS, schools, the police force, hospitality, manufacturing, engineering, HGV drivers, construction, IT. Under this government, there is no sector in our economy that has access to the skills it needs. One of the key drivers of our workforce shortages is ill health. Because of the government's neglect, our NHS and social care are stretched to breaking point. More than 7 million people are waiting for treatment, and thousands can't get discharged from hospital when they're ready, because there is no one there to look after them. There are 165,000 vacancies in our social care sector. Fill these vacancies and you could ease pressure on our NHS, cut discharge times, and let people return to work quicker. The Conservatives simply don't get that to fix the workforce, you need to fix social care first. But the Liberal Democrats do. So we are calling on the government to put in place a minimum wage for carers, giving them a pay boost of £2 an hour. This wouldn't just be a recognition of their vital work, it would go a huge way towards attracting new workers to the sector, helping our NHS and our economy. A fair and pragmatic plan that the government could comfortably afford if they reversed their massive tax cuts for big banks. But there's another challenge, and that's giving people the skills they need to succeed. And here too, we are being failed by this government. We need a better offer for school leavers to ensure that they can access the education that will unlock their potential and the skills our economy needs for the future. We all know that apprenticeships have a huge role to play in this, and yes, we need more of them. But let's also make them more attractive. Consider the options open to an 18-year-old school leaver right now. They could choose to take up a typical high street job, say in retail or hospitality. It might not be the job of their dreams, but it's a foot on the job ladder, and it pays enough to make ends meet. But if they were to take up an apprenticeship and perhaps pursue their true interests in engineering, IT, or business, they'd be in for a nasty surprise. An apprentice's wage of just £4.81 an hour. That's nearly half the national living wage, shockingly low, and nowhere near enough to get through the month. Not only is this a huge injustice, especially for young people, it's exactly the wrong incentive if we're looking to build the workforce of the future. So, if the government truly cares about skills, I've got an idea for them. End this unfair tax on young people's ambition and scrap the insultingly low apprentice's wage. Give everyone access to the national minimum wage equally. This would be a pay rise of up to 98%, opening a pathway to better paid jobs in the future. Employers need more help with apprenticeships too. The system put in place by the Conservatives in 2017 has led to a precipitous fall in apprenticeship starts, and around £500 million set aside for the on-the-job training through the so-called apprenticeship levy goes unspent each year and is returned to the Treasury. This is a shocking waste of money, especially in the face of a skills crisis. By coincidence, the Association of Colleges estimates that the further education sector needs a funding boost of £500 million if it is to keep pace with the demands of the economy for additional skills. So why doesn't the government funnel these much-needed funds to our colleges and train more young people in the skills we need, and reform the apprenticeship levy into a broader, more flexible skills and training levy? Alongside measures to boost our workforce, we need to boost private sector investment into our businesses. The Conservatives' policy on this has failed badly. Their constant flip-flopping on tax and investment rules and their badly targeted incentives have not achieved the growth they promised us. What they should be doing instead is introduce the kinds of incentives that have been proven to boost productivity, like tax breaks for training to ensure that employees can continue to develop their skills, both for their own benefit and for the benefit of their employers. Or allowances for digital investment to enable businesses to invest quickly and early in the newest digital tools to make productivity gains. And most importantly, encouraging proper, ambitious, bold investment in energy efficiency. Whether that's for switching a fleet to electric cars or installing solar panels, reducing demand for energy is not only essential to decarbonising our industrial sector, but also for bringing down production costs. The Conservatives should restore the research and development tax breaks that they cut to enable businesses to fully explore the opportunities opening up in artificial intelligence and robotics, and to ensure that the UK can continue to be a powerhouse of technical innovation. If we wish to release the inherent potential of our economy, we need to develop our markets and meet the challenges of the future. A significant contributor to the country's poor economic performance under the Conservatives is our reduced levels of trade with our European partners. This was, of course, a well-anticipated result of the government's policy of leaving the European Union. Erecting trade barriers with our nearest neighbours has not been matched by an increase in trade with the rest of the world. This is despite the Conservatives' promises of a multitude of lucrative trade agreements awaiting our departure from the EU. The Centre for European Reform estimates that thanks to the Conservatives' actions, the UK economy is already 5.5% poorer than it could have been. And it's not just the trade barriers that they erected 2 years ago. The UK has also seen a dramatic decline in investment since 2016, and the biggest driver of this trend is the chaos and instability wrought by the Conservatives. Their ideological obsession with erecting barriers to trade with our neighbours and friends, supporting the most reckless Prime Minister in modern political history, who provoked division with our closest allies to support his personal ambitions, and continuing to threaten to unilaterally break international treaties, all of these have undermined investors' confidence in the UK, and that confidence will not return as long as the Conservatives are in power. The recovery of the UK economy for the benefit of all its citizens depends upon the Conservatives losing the next general election, a goal to which I know everyone in this room is 100% committed. There's another goal to which I know we're all committed, perhaps the only goal more urgent than ousting this terrible government. I refer, of course, to the achievement of net zero. Under the Conservatives, we're not where we need to be. Action from the government is lagging behind the progress we need to make. The private sector stands ready with the capital, skills and innovative capacity to decarbonise transport, energy and industry, but we are lacking leadership and strategy from the government. We urgently need a bold plan for green investment in new technologies like tidal power, hydrogen, battery technology, in green skills for the future, and in long overdue projects like the far-reaching home insulation scheme that our drafty houses are crying out for. Over the last 8 years, Conservative mismanagement has badly hurt the UK economy. Britain deserves so much better than this lack of a plan, this lack of leadership, this lack of commitment to the country's best interests that we see from the Conservatives. We need a government that will rally together the public and private sector to get the most out of our people, our natural resources, and all the other advantages that the UK has to offer, to deliver a future that's fairer, greener, and more prosperous for everyone all across these islands. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we move to lunch, there is still a ballot. You have precisely 12 minutes remaining to submit an emergency motion ballot. The ballot can be found to stage left, and you've got till 1 o'clock to submit those ballots. Thank you.